Chapter 121. Rujui was still behind closed doors. Guinan Shan, Gu Han, Jian Riyun, and other disciples of Liangwang Peak couldn't participate in the plum meeting for various reasons. Among the masters and disciples of Aoyama who came to participate in the plum meeting, Zhao Liu was the center of attention, followed by Jingjiu. It was because they were the personal disciples of the immortal Jingyang, and they were the second-generation masters of the Aoyama sect at such a young age. Nobody could compare to them in terms of legendary experiences. Besides, there were two more rumors that made them even more famous. Zhao Liu was slovenly, her hair short and messy. She often appeared in public with dust all over her body, which made her look sloppy. The rumors related to Jingjiu referred to his face. It was said that he was too beautiful to be a real person. Some people said he was too beautiful to be a real person. Jingjiu stood behind Zhao Liu, keeping a low profile. However, as he had said to Zhao Liu, the clouds couldn't block the sun forever, no matter how thick they were. Moreover, there were no clouds in the sky above Zhaoga City today. It was impossible for him to wear the conical hat or the mask at the plum meeting that day. Countless gazes were fixed on his face. The exclamations and low voices could be heard all over the plum garden, like a flock of birds flying over. He's really good-looking. How could there be such a good-looking man? I think so. How could there be such a good-looking man? Well, what's that thing on his back? Is it a sword? It's impossible. I heard that he had a great performance at the sword trial of Aoyama. Has he not entered the golden pill state yet? According to the cultivation states of Aoyama's sect, he should be in the undefeated state. Those who had such doubts were from the remote sects that didn't have good information. Those sects that knew the details of the sword trial of Aoyama were even more puzzled. Jingjiu had obviously entered the undefeated state, so why did he still carry his sword on his back? Did he intend to conceal his true cultivation state? When the people from Aoyama's sect arrived, the disciples of Zhongzhou school naturally looked over. As the two leaders of the Alliance of the Righteous Sects, they rarely had the chance to meet the disciples of Aoyama's sect. Naturally, they were curious. A white curtain surrounded the place, and a gentle voice came from inside. "Which one of you is Zhao Liu?" Xiang Wanshu said respectfully. "Big sister, the one sitting in the chair in the distance is him." The woman was slightly surprised and said, "She's obviously a delicate and pretty girl. So why are the rumors saying that she's so unbearable?" Xiang Wanshu recalled the scene when he met Zhao Liu at the Four Seas banquet last year, and his expression warmed a bit, saying, "It's nothing but the jealousy of the villagers." That Jingjiu is as beautiful as rumored, almost devilishly beautiful. The woman seemed to be shocked by Jingjiu's beauty, saying, "Those who have reached the extreme must be extraordinary. We should pay more attention to him." A disciple said proudly, "Gu Han is too arrogant and confident. It's not a big deal that Jingjiu can defeat him. He's merely in the initial state of the undefeated, not worth mentioning." Xiang Wanshu smiled bitterly, thinking that the seventh big brother had been defeated by Gu Han at the last plum meeting, and now they were saying such a thing. Who was too arrogant and confident? In the deep end of the cold platform, where Shui Yu Nunnery was, a woman with a white veil covering her face was also looking in that direction. Her gaze fell on Zhao Liu, feeling satisfied, thinking that Jingyang's judgment was trustworthy most of the time and that he had chosen a good successor. In the next moment, she looked at Jingjiu, feeling disappointed, thinking that Jingjiu's appearance was far inferior compared to Jingyang. The relationship between the Western Sea Sword School and the Aoyama sect had never been good, so they wouldn't talk about Jingjiu's appearance like other sects did. Tong Lu stood by the edge of the cold platform, looking at Jingjiu on the opposite side. His appearance was ordinary, but his posture was very straight, like a real sword, and his eyes were extremely sharp. He knew that Jingjiu didn't want to conceal his true cultivation state, because the disciples of the Aoyama sect wouldn't be so stupid. There could only be one reason why Jingjiu didn't want to put his sword into the sword pill, which was that he looked better with a long sword on his back. He's still not satisfied with such a handsome face. What a show-off. He said to the elder of the Western Sea Sword School by his side, Senior Master, please send someone to keep an eye on the Pure Heaven Bureau. If this person signs up for the cultivation tournament, I don't mind being in the same group as him." More than 1,000 gazes fell on Jingjiu. At least at this moment, he was the focus of this plum meeting. Jingjiu didn't know about it, or he wasn't sure about it. More precisely, he didn't care about it at all. As the saying goes, as the sun, one should be aware of being the center of attention. There were many conjectures as to why he carried the sword on his back, but he was indeed innocent in this regard. He had never thought of concealing his true cultivation state, and it wasn't because he wanted to show off. It was for a simple reason. After entering the state of the undefeated, he still couldn't put his flying sword into the sword pill. He had been worried that something might happen to his special body, so he had been hesitant to break through the state. It wasn't until he saw Lu Shui being beaten to the ground by Guananshan that he finally made up his mind and took the step forward. As expected, he was different from other disciples of the state of the undefeated, and had such a problem. Fortunately, this problem was much smaller than what he had worried about at the beginning. All he needed to do was deceive Zhao Liu. There were many chairs on the platform, and only the 2 peak masters were qualified to sit on them. After riding the sword onto the platform, Jingjiu signaled Zhao Liu with his eyes to sit on the chair furthest to the side, far away from the peak master of Qingrong. Zhao Liu didn't refuse him, but she found it strange that he had to avoid the peak master of Qingrong. This kind of thing had happened more than once or twice. He had even stopped Sister Yushan from going to Qingrong Peak in secret. Zhao Liu dressed herself seriously today. She washed her face, combed her hair, and changed into a new set of clothes. Her hair was no longer messy. It was combed smoothly, and she tied it into a short braid to ensure that none of her hair would come loose. Her face was also very pretty, very clean and tidy. Her thick eyebrows were like the birds in a landscape painting, very vivid. The only problem was that she was too plain, with no adornment on her clean face or green sword robe, unlike a girl of her age. A winter sweet tree was planted by the cold platform. It was late spring, and there was a small yellow flower on the branch. Jingjiu didn't care about the flower at all. He reached out his hand to pluck the flower, and then inserted it into Zhao Liu's hair. Zhao Liu didn't understand, asking, "What's wrong?" Jingjiu took 2 steps back and looked her up and down. He nodded satisfactorily, saying, "You look good." Zhao Liu said with a faint smile, "I know I look good." Jingjiu said, "I mean the flower." Zhao Liu didn't get angry, asking, "What about me?" Jingjiu said, "You have always looked good." This scene fell into the eyes of countless people. Dozens of cold platforms in the plum garden were in an uproar. Had the 2 of them become cultivation partners? Among the cultivation practitioners of the younger generation, there were many admirers of Zhao Liu, just like those disciples of Aoyama. There were many rumors about Zhao Liu in the last few years, saying that she had short hair, a cold temperament, and a slovenly appearance. But to tell the truth, nobody cared about these rumors. There were too many handsome men and beautiful women in the cultivation circle, but there was only one Zhao Liu. In addition to those admirers, she was also the most worthy target in the eyes of the most practical cultivation practitioners. It was because she had natural Tao quality, was the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang, and was also the master of the Shenma Peak of the Aoyama sect. Even if it was just a wishful thinking, they would feel happy if they could win the favor of Zhao Liu, and what a bright future they would have. Unfortunately, those people's wishful thinking seemed to have been shattered a moment ago. "Young brother, are you all right?" On the cold platform of the Zhongzhou school, the 7th-ranked disciple asked Xiang Wanshu worriedly. Xiang Wanshu's face was pale, as if he had just lost the most important thing. Chapter 122. First of all, the name of this book was called The Path Toward Heaven. Secondly, 1.5 volumes have been written. The first volume was called The Ferry by the River. The name and the poem at the beginning of the volume matched the plot, which was awesome. The second volume was called Sumuja. Judging from the name and the plot, it was awesome as well. The Path Toward Heaven was a fairy cultivation novel about ascending to heaven. The story began with the ascension of the Grand Master Jingyang of the sword sect of Aoyama. the most outstanding cultivator in Chaotian. What the whole land didn't know was that Jingyang didn't succeed in his ascension. A youth in white clothing named Jing Jiu walked out from the deep end of the mountain. He worked in a small village for 9 days and slacked off for 4 seasons. 1 year later, he re-entered the sword sect of Aoyama with a young boy named Lu Shui and started cultivating. Then he met Zhao Leiyu. Through various stories, Jing Jiu, Lu Shui, and Zhao Leiyu became famous. But Lu Shui was involved in a big game, and his whereabouts were unknown for the time being. Jing Jiu and Zhao Leiyu became the masters of the 9th peak in Aoyama, and they took on a disciple named Gu Qing. Of course, there was also a youth with the surname of Yuan, whose name was still unknown, and a young sister who was temporarily not on the list in Shanghai Peak. Gu Qing was a young man with a good temperament, and he was the younger brother of Gu Han. Gu Han was the 3rd brother of Liangwang Peak. The eldest brother was Guanan Shan, and the second brother was... Forget it, there were too many characters and I didn't want to write them down. If you have time, you can read it from the beginning again. I think it's quite interesting. The plot had progressed to the point where Jing Jiu and Zhao Leiyu were heading to Zhaoga City to participate in the Plum Meeting, a grand event in the cultivation world. At the Plum Meeting, Jing Jiu would encounter the most powerful challenge in his 2 lives. It was because he had never learned how to play chess, and his opponent was an unparalleled talent in chess playing, a young man named Tong Yan. In the previous chapter, Jing Jiu and Zhao Leiyu made a dazzling entrance. Jing Jiu plucked a plum blossom and inserted it into Zhao Leiyu's hair. It was very beautiful, and his words were very mushy, blinding a group of people. Xiang Wanshu of the Zhongzhou school was very sad. Oh, he was Tong Yan's junior brother. He had met Jing Zhao once at the Four Seas banquet. See, I really can't study character relationships anymore. He was too tired. At 8 o'clock on the evening of the 25th, the first chapter will be updated after a long break. Since I'm on a long journey back to the Northeast and haven't written for a long time, I'm not very good at it, so I can only try to write a little every day. The quality of the chapters won't be very good, but I can't wait until I'm good enough to update them. It's because I've revised them many times, but I still feel the same. The feeling can only be improved by writing more chapters. I estimate it will take about 10 days. Chapter 123. Last year, when Xiang Wanshu met Zhao Leiyu by the West Ocean, he saw Zhao Leiyu wielding her sword to kill someone without uttering a single word. His temperament was very mild, even a bit weak, and he had never thought that he could do such a thing. The rainbow that illuminated the cloud platform was the thoughtless sword. Zhao Leiyu was the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang. The immortal Jingyang was the senior master he admired the most. All these emotions made him feel a sense of awe toward Zhao Leiyu, and then an admiration grew out of the awe. He knew that it was impossible for him and Zhao Leiyu to become cultivation partners, so he hid his admiration deep in his heart. Yet, how could he not think about the name of the sword? Over the last year, he had been thinking that if he could see Zhao Leiyu again, he might be able to get closer to her, even if it was just to look at her a few more times. He finally saw Zhao Leiyu again at the Plum Meeting today, but he didn't expect to see such a scene. I'm fine. His voice was full of disappointment. Jing Jiu and Zhao Leiyu didn't know what the cultivation practitioners on the coal platform were talking about, and they didn't know how many people were as disappointed as Xiang Wanshu. They picked up the plum flower and inserted it in their hair. The seemingly sweet and affectionate conversation was a natural behavior for them, a common conversation. Back when they first met in the clouds on the Sword Peak, they had been together a lot, especially in the last 4 years when they traveled tens of thousands of miles together. They had been together day and night, so they were familiar with each other. In many people's eyes, this was the love between a man and a woman. But they didn't think so, or, in other words, they had never thought about it. They didn't deny it for the sake of denying it. They really hadn't thought about it. There were too many things to think about when looking at the surroundings and the stars, and when looking back to the eternity. Everyone had too little time in their lives. The human world wasn't worth it, let alone love. The chilly wind blew over the cold platform along with the clouds. The discussions had gradually died down. Dukovy came to the arena and announced the beginning of the plum meeting. The rules were still the same. His Majesty the Divine Emperor would show up in the last law battle. The truly powerful figures of the cultivation world would only appear then. The cultivation practitioners participating in the plum meeting were all aware of this. Normally, this should be quite calm, but many young disciples and even the masters in charge of the plum meeting displayed a disappointed expression because Tian Jingren didn't show up. It was rumored that the immortal man who could decide one's future life and death had come to Zhaoga City, and he would judge the disciples participating in the plum meeting. People, of course, hoped to see him at the plum meeting. Even if they couldn't win at the plum meeting, it would still be a great fortune for them to get this immortal man's guidance. The plum meeting was one of the most important meetings in the cultivation world. The participants of the plum meeting were all young people. Not the most important figures in the cultivation circle, but some of them would definitely reach that level. The history of the past had proven this. Except for the immortal Jingyang, all the important figures in Chaotian had shown their prowess at the plum meeting. The world-famous meeting had an ordinary beginning. After Prince He's announcement, dozens of young disciples from various sects came to the cold platform in the middle, their clothes fluttering in the wind, noiselessly. Zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, and cultivation were all things that could enter the cultivation path. The most important competition of the plum meeting was the cultivation tournament at the end, and the first one that day was the Zither competition. The Zither competition of the cultivation practitioners was different from that of the musicians in the mortal world. Besides the moving sound of the Zither, there were other judging criteria. Not all the participants played the Zither. The young practitioners on the cold platform held different musical instruments in their hands. Some played the bamboo flute, some played the pipa, some played the ancient clay pot, and some played the cigar. There was even one who didn't bring any musical instrument, and it seemed that he was going to sing a song. The Zither music rang out like the tinkling of the spring water. As a young woman in white walked onto the stage bravely with the ancient Zither in her arms, the plum meeting officially began. The music didn't stop after that. Most of the participants who came onto the stage at the beginning were from the small sects, but their musical instruments were extraordinary. The Zither music was moving, and the bamboo flute music was distant. Even the most famous musicians in the imperial court couldn't compare to them. However, the cold platform at the top remained quiet. Neither Prince He nor the highly achieved monks of the Guochang Temple made any comments, let alone Zen Master himself. The cultivation practitioners of various sects didn't react to the competition either. It wasn't until a scholar-like disciple from Ozawa came onto the stage that the crowd became more spirited. The famous sects were indeed extraordinary. As the scholar put the folding fan back to his waist, the Zither music came out from his fingertips, and the energy of heaven and earth responded to it. The mountain wind was still chilly, but it had stopped. A layer of dew had formed on the plum blossoms around the cold platform, glistening under the sunlight, looking like beautiful crystals. As the scholar from Ozawa finished playing the Zither, the cheers and applause broke out on the cold platforms. Soon after, as the young practitioners of various sects came onto the stage one after another, strange phenomena occurred in heaven and earth. The wind rose, and the rain fell along with the music. When Xiang Wanshu, representing the Zhongzhou school, came onto the stage with his bamboo flute, the snowflakes fell down from the sky, and the plum blossoms looked even prouder. The cheers became more frequent, and the praises increased, but some people still didn't show any emotion or even didn't care. Some of them couldn't help but fix their gazes on the cold platform where the masters and disciples of the Aoyama sect were. The masters and disciples of the Aoyama sect were a typical example of indifference. Different from other cultivation sects, the Aoyama sect didn't care about those so-called methods of cultivating the Tao heart, which included zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. In a sense, the Aoyama sect was an exception in the cultivation world of Chaotian. In the memory of the cultivation world of Chaotian, the Aoyama sect rarely participated in the first 4 events of the plum meeting. It was only many years ago that the current peak master of Qingrong, Nan Wang, participated in the zither competition once, and unexpectedly won the competition. Nobody knew why Nan Wang participated in the zither competition. All they knew was that she was a bit angry at the time, walking to the cold platform with a red face. She plucked a leaf from a tree and played a folk song with it. As a result, all the dogs in Zhaoga City started barking cheerfully. Without a doubt, she won first place in the zither competition. In the meantime, it was the only time in the history of the Aoyama sect that someone won first place in the zither competition. Since then, the Aoyama sect hadn't had an outstanding performance in the zither competition. Of course, nobody dared mock the disciples of the Aoyama sect because of this. It was because nobody wanted to face an angry and murderous sword of the Aoyama sect in the final cultivation tournament. The masters and disciples of the Aoyama sect didn't care about the zither competition in front of them. The winner will be Shui Yu Nunnery anyway, Nan Wang said. Back when she was a little girl who had just come out from the barbarian land of the south, she was praised by the master of the plum meeting for her natural naivety when she won the zither competition. She was an important figure of the Aoyama sect now, and she had a profound temperament, but she still retained some of her old temperament. For instance, this comment was a bit too direct. Her voice wasn't loud, but the disciples on the cold platform heard it clearly. The female disciples of Qingrong Peak and Yaosong's Han all agreed with her comment. Yet, Zhao Lei didn't understand what she meant, looking at Jingjiu. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze from Nan Wang and said, Shui Yu Nunnery is the best at the heaven-human connection, and he uses the zither music to enter the Tao. No one can match him in this aspect. As they were talking, the disciple of Shui Yu Nunnery finally appeared on the stage. The applause broke out before the zither music started. One could imagine the anticipation of the participants of the plum meeting. The girl who appeared on the stage was Mo Shi. As the personal disciple of the master of Shui Yu Nunnery, she won first place easily in the zither competition at the Four Seas banquet last year, so her zither skills were extraordinary. Usually, she could win easily, but after listening to her zither music, many people didn't think so. Even she herself didn't have much hope of winning. The mountain wind ruffled the white veil gently. Xiang Wanshu and the other disciples of the Zhongzhou school stepped aside, and a young girl in white with soft eyes and brows walked out slowly. Is she Bai Zhao? Bai Zhao has actually appeared on the stage. Shui Yu Nunnery might not win this year. The discussions broke out on the cold platform. The human world is not worth it. This is what Li Dan said. I have been watching the dissing conference recently, and I like it very much. I also like Li Dan very much. This is the most important part of Jingjiu that I want to write, but this part isn't written in the book. It's not worth it, so let's enjoy ourselves. I kept repeating this phrase when I was drinking in the last 2 years. So this book is of course a comedy. Let's just play along with Jingjiu happily. As for the sentence, Shui Yu Nunnery will win anyway, it came from Song Tudo's joke. Luo Yingshizhen and Jin Taihao are leaving for Real. See you all tomorrow. Especially for the martial arts sects and the major clans, they were still very particular about etiquette. Oh, Han Dong turned around and recognized the middle-aged man. Chapter 124. Even the typesetting yesterday was a mess. I'm speechless. Bai Zhao was the only daughter of the sect master of Zhongzhou school. She was talented and had a peaceful Tao heart. She was a rare genius in cultivation and was highly valued by her master. She was one of the top cultivation practitioners of the young generation in Zhongzhou school. More importantly, she was generous and resolute in handling matters, so she was highly respected by her peers. Even Tong Yin, who was arrogant and didn't even like Lo Huainan, was quite obedient to Bai Zhao and never objected to her. At the last plum meeting, Lo Huainan declared in public that she would go to the north to fight against the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom for the humans. Tong Yin was a bit aloof and proud. Zhuo Ruzhui had been behind closed doors for many years. Zhao Lei had just shown her strength. In many people's eyes, She was the most likely candidate for the position of the leader of the cultivation circle in Chaotian and the position of the Orthodox sect master, which had been vacant for many years. It was the first time for many cultivation practitioners to see Bai Zhao that day. They didn't expect that this person, who was rumored to be composed and generous and resolute in handling matters, was actually such a delicate and beautiful young woman. Her white dress tousled slightly in the wind, and so did her black hair. Her eyebrows were thin and her eyes were calm, looking like a painting. Her expression was delicate and pitiful, like the first lotus or the thin willow. This was Bai Zhao. People were stunned by her beauty and frailty, speechless for a moment. Only the disciples of Aoyama's sect could keep calm, or in other words, they had woken up earlier. It was because they were used to seeing Jing Jiu's face, so it was hard for them to be stunned by other beautiful things. Is this Bai Zhao? Zhao Lei was surprised. The disciples of Aoyama were also surprised, thinking that this young woman was as famous as Senior Master Zhao, and maybe even more talented than him, but he had never cared about her. Is she a woman? Jing Jiu was surprised as well. He had heard of this name before, but it was the first time he knew her gender. The disciples of Aoyama were speechless, thinking that these two senior masters of the ninth peak were truly incredible. Her slender fingers fell on the strings of the zither. It looked like a gentle pluck, but what came out was an extremely bright sound. It was like a willow branch falling on the surface of a stream, but it attracted a bolt of lightning. No matter what kind of thoughts they had, from the first sound of the zither, everyone's attention on the dozens of coal platforms was attracted by Bai Zhao. The chilly mountain wind blew her white dress and the hair on her cheeks. Her posture was so delicate, but the music she played was so clear and clean. It called over countless birds hidden in the mountains. Some perched on the plum trees, some squatted in the grass on the side of the mountain path, and their cries matched each other. It was like a fairyland written by mortals. She knew she had lost. Though she was mentally prepared, she still felt a bit disappointed. When she saw the expression in Xiang Wanshu's eyes, she felt even more disappointed. Xiang Wanshu didn't look at her or Bai Zhao. He looked at the cold platform where the master and disciple of Aoyama's sect were. She knew who he was looking at. The sound of the zither echoed among the cold platforms, accompanied by the cries of hundreds of birds. It was impossible not to be moved when one heard and saw it. Even Nan Wang raised his eyebrows. The praises of Prince he could be vaguely heard coming from the cold platform above. Jing Jiu and Zhao Lei were still calm, their expressions unchanged. If Xiang Wanshu and Mo, she didn't pay attention to Bai Zhao's zither playing because they had their own thoughts. What about them? Yao Songshan's sword heart spun slightly, and he woke up from the wonderful world of zither playing. Looking at Jing Jiu and Zhao Lei, he asked in surprise, "Senior Master, isn't this good enough?" Zhao Lei didn't quite understand, saying, "I think it's good enough." Jing Jiu agreed with her, saying it's really good. For them, it was a compliment to hear it good enough, but it sounded a bit perfunctory to others. Scratching his head, Yao Songshan asked, "Why is Senior Master so calm then?" Zhao Lei now understood what he meant, saying, "There are many good sounds in the world. All you need to do is listen to them. Do you want to clap your hands just because the stream water is pleasant to the ears?" Yao Songshan was taken aback, feeling that this statement was not right, but he also thought it was a good idea. The song was over, but the birds didn't want to leave, unwilling to part ways. Bai Zhao got up and turned his head to look at the coal platform where the Aoyama sect was located. It was then that Zhao Lei also looked at him. Their gazes met. Bai Zhao curled up the corners of his mouth, revealing a faint smile. She was a talented young girl at Zhongzhou School, regarded by many as the best candidate to be the leader of the cultivation circle in the coming decades. She was praised and sought after by many people. It wasn't until Zhao Lei appeared a few years ago that she gained some of the limelight. As such, she paid a lot of attention to Zhao Lei. Seeing that Zhao Lei was looking at her, she thought that Zhao Lei was also paying attention to her. But she was wrong. Zhao Lei was looking at her, but she was paying attention to someone else. Since she is here, why didn't Lo Huainan show up? There were many famous figures among the younger generation of cultivation, such as Bai Zhao, who was standing in the mountains like a fairy, Tong Yin, who was said to be as wise as a fairy, Rujui, who had been in closed-door training for many years and thus became more mysterious, Guanan Shan, the first disciple of Aoyama, Tong Lu of Western Sea Sword School, and Zhao Lei herself. In the mortal world, Tong Yin was the most famous, and in the cultivation circle, Bai Zhao had the highest status. But in the minds of these young swordsmen, Lo Huainan was the most famous. The reason was simple. It was because Lo Huainan had the highest cultivation state and the strongest prowess. Beside Zhao Lei, Nin Wang was also concerned about this matter. Why didn't Lo Huainan and Tong Yin show up? He asked. The disciple of Aoyama responsible for external communication replied, "We haven't received any news about them." Tong Yin had a strange and proud temperament, so it was possible that she didn't want to show up. But as the principal disciple of the sect master of Zhongzhou School, it was impossible for Lo Huainan not to show up at an event like the Plum Meeting, unless there was something more important than the Plum Meeting. But what could be more important than the Plum Meeting? A disciple of Aoyama guessed. Is he cultivating hard to break through the cultivation state in order to prepare for the cultivation tournament? Yao Songzhan shook his head and said, he doesn't need it. According to the accurate information released by the curtain rollers, Lo Huainan had entered the later stage of the Golden Pill state at the beginning of the year, which was equivalent to the middle state of the free travel of the Aoyama sect. With such a profound cultivation state, no one among the cultivation practitioners of the young generation could be his match. Even if one looked higher, it would be hard to find a cultivation practitioner of the middle generation who could defeat him because so many swordsmen had fallen in the war against the Snowy Kingdom. If Big Brother comes this time, we might have a chance. Hearing this, the disciples of Aoyama nodded in agreement. Only Guanan Shan in the initial state of the free travel had a chance to defeat the powerful Lo Huainan. However, many gazes fell on Jing Jiu reflexively. It was he who broke Guanan Shan's sword at the sword trial of Aoyama. A voice rang out, "Let me handle the cultivation tournament." The speaker was not Jing Jiu. He had no interest in these matters. It was Zhao Lei. The disciples of Aoyama were all stunned. Jing Jiu shot a glance at her. She was neither too big nor too small. It was quite noisy in the theater at the moment. Perhaps only the girl sitting in the front could hear it. Chapter 125. Hearing Zhao Lei's words, Nin Wang asked, "Are you sure?" Many people knew that Zhao Lei had entered the middle state of the undefeated 2 years ago, so she shouldn't be able to break through the state again so soon. Even then, she could still be considered to be an extremely rare cultivation genius at her current age. Her natural Tao quality was indeed extraordinary. However, her cultivation time was too short, and the gap between her and Lo Huainan was too great, so she had no chance of winning the cultivation tournament. Zhao Lei answered without hesitation, yes. Regardless of their cultivation states, the two of them were both peak masters of Aoyama, so Nin Wang couldn't say anything. He just shook his head, and the other disciples didn't dare say anything to dissuade her. It was then that Bai Zhao finished playing his zither music. It was quiet on the cold platform. Many people thought that if no other disciple of Shui Yununri showed up, the comment that had been passed down for a long time would finally be broken. But before that, the silence on the cold platform was broken by a wave of discussion. The news was spreading among a dozen cold platforms high up in the mountain, causing a commotion. The Aoyama sect soon received the news. Tian Jingren was somewhere in the city. Since Lo Huainan and Tong Yin didn't show up today, they were probably paying a visit to him. It was a rare opportunity to get a comment from Tian Jingren. If they could get a few words of praise from him, the cultivation practitioners would have a higher status and more resources in their sections. Many people were tempted, but this was a grand event of the Plum Meeting, where the chancellors of the imperial court and the masters of various sects were present. Who dared leave without permission? Jing Jiu noticed the change in Zhao Lei's expression, asking, "Do you want to go and have a look?" Zhao Lei said, "I'm just curious." Jing Jiu said, "Let's go and have a look then." The two of them stood up and walked down the coal platform after informing Inwang. Many people noticed the commotion, causing an uproar, thinking that the plum meeting wasn't over yet, and Zen Master hadn't commented on it yet. How could they just leave like that? Looking at the two figures, Bai Zhao frowned slightly, looking even more delicate. She could guess what Zhao Liu and Jing Jiu were going to do. She didn't care about this because Luo, Huainan, and Tong Yin should have already met the rumored Master of Destiny, and this was arranged by her in the first place. What she cared about, or was disappointed about, was another matter. She was so anxious to see Tian Jingren. Could it be that she needed his affirmation in order to maintain her confidence? How could such a Zhao Lei be worthy of being his opponent? The mountain path that led out of the plum garden was behind the cold platform. After making 2 turns, the figures of Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu disappeared from everyone's sight. Zhao Liu had already accepted some of Jing Jiu's eccentricities after traveling for tens of thousands of miles. For example, he would rather walk than ride a sword unless there were special circumstances. They chatted casually as they walked on the mountain path. Jing Jiu knew that the person Zhao Liu really wanted to see wasn't Tian Jingren, but Lo Huainan, who was probably visiting Tian Jingren at the moment, because of the cultivation tournament that would take place in 10 days. Jing Jiu said, "If the rumor is true, you are no match for him." Zhao Liu said, "We won't know until we fight." This statement was in line with her attitude toward cultivation. The path to heaven was extremely dangerous. If one was afraid of this and that, then what was the point of cultivation? Jing Jiu glanced at her once, without saying anything. Zhao Liu remembered clearly that when she said she wanted to participate in the cultivation tournament, Jing Jiu also glanced at her in the same way. He didn't say anything, but his meaning was clear. "You don't agree?" She was puzzled. In the past few years of cultivation, Jing Jiu had never stopped her from taking risks, no matter what kind of dangerous situation she encountered, whether it was to slay demons or kill people with the flying swords. But why did he disagree with her idea of participating in the cultivation tournament? Jing Jiu said, "I haven't participated in the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting, but I know something about it." Zhao Liu said, "Seeking plum blossoms by stepping on blood? I don't care." Jing Jiu looked at her calmly and seriously, saying, "That's the real world." Zhao Liu also became serious, saying, "I know what the real world means. Those battles on the path of tens of thousands of miles are still not the real world. They are at most half true and half false. But what I'm talking about is the real world that even I don't want to touch." Jing Jiu said this while staring into her eyes. Zhao Liu asked, "What is the real world?" Jing Jiu said, "Death is the real world. To be exact, it's your own death." By now, they had reached the middle of the mountain. The gentle wind ruffled the wild trees on the cliffs. The scenery was wonderful. It was a pity that those chirping birds were still lingering on the other side of the cliff. As a result, the scenery became less lively. Zhao Liu thought about it for a long time and said, "I don't understand." Jing Jiu said, "It's better if you don't understand." Zhao Liu suddenly felt that Jing Jiu was very far away from her when he said these words. She seemed to see an endless abyss on Jing Jiu's beautiful face. The abyss meant that he was far away from her. This feeling made her feel very uncomfortable. She changed the topic awkwardly. "Though I'm not interested, I'm still curious about the final result." She was not talking about the cultivation tournament, but the zither competition that day. Jing Jiu repeated the famous saying in the cultivation circle, "The winner is Shui Yu Nunnery anyway." A zither music suddenly broke out in the sky. It started from the coal platform. Separated by a mountain, the zither music became very soft when it reached them, but it was very clear to their ears that there seemed to be a great power hidden in it. Then the second zither music broke out and did not stop. But the music was not like flowing water. It was choppy and chaotic, lacking even the most basic rhythm, not to mention beautiful. But somehow, Jing Jiu seemed to be moved by the zither music. He stopped and stood at the edge of the cliff, looking at the sky for a long time without saying anything. It was different from when Bai Zhao played the zither. When this person played the zither, The birds did not sing together. It was not that the birds did not like the zither music, but that they did not dare to make sound. The zither player's fingering was obviously rusty, like a beginner. But the music he played was incomparably domineering, as if it could take away all the sounds in the world. Not to mention the birds. During the time when the person played the zither, even a mountain wind blowing the treetops and the stream water flowing into the deep ravine could not make any sound. When my flower blooms, all flowers are killed. When I make a sound, the world must listen quietly. This was momentum. Zhao Liu felt the residual meaning in the mountains, suppressed the shock in her heart, looked at Jing Jiu's side profile, and thought of the scenes in Haizhou last year. This person played the zither like Jing Jiu playing chess. Beginner. Rough technique. Not good, but unparalleled in the world. Jing Jiu looked at the sky thoughtfully. A cloud very high up had been torn to pieces by the zither music. Zhao Liu said softly, "I don't know who it is." Jing Jiu did not know who the person playing the zither was, but he knew the person's background, because he heard the style of an old friend from the zither music. Shui Yu nunnery, he said. Zhao Liu thought of the famous saying again, Shui Yu nunnery wins anyway. Then she thought of Shui Yu nunnery, the ordinary-looking woman on the cold platform. Chapter 126. That day in Zhaoga City, the plum meeting was the sole focus of the public's attention. However, an undercurrent was surging in the dark outside the eager gazes of the regular populace. The young cultivation practitioners participating in the plum meeting had their minds elsewhere. Countless pieces of news were circulating on the yellow roof tiles and the regular streets and alleys. The important figures of various sects, the high officials in the imperial court, and the magnates in the southern city were all looking for the whereabouts of one person, Tian Jingren. Some people wanted to know how long they had left to live. Some wanted to know where their nascent souls had gone. Some wanted to know the divine emperor's hobbies. Some wanted to know if their only son was really their biological son. And of course, there were also some people who wanted to know more important questions, such as whether spiritual master Jingyang had really failed in his ascension. Jingjiu wasn't sure whether Zhao Liu wanted to ask Tian Jingren this question, or to find out the whereabouts of Insan, or just to see Lo Huainan, the genius cultivation practitioner of Zhongzhou School who might be meeting Tian Jingren, was the most popular candidate in the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting and also her strongest opponent. However, no matter what reason Zhao Liu had for wanting to meet Tian Jingren, Jingjiu would take her there. In the Aoyama sect, Zhao Liu was the master of the Shenma Peak, and he was a regular disciple. The two of them should call each other senior sister and junior brother, but in fact, he had always regarded himself as her master. Zhao Liu had gotten used to this and accepted it. When a master needed help, the disciple needed help. When the disciple needed help, the master needed to help. Others didn't know where Tian Jingren was, and neither did Jingjiu. But Jingjiu knew who knew where Tian Jingren was. There was a bustling street by the White Horse Lake in the east of Zhaoga City. There was a medical house on the west side of the street, with a begonia flower carved on the plaque. There was a doctor and a waiter inside, looking a bit shabby and desolate. Who would have thought that this medical house was the most important and highest level branch of the Curtain Rollers, the largest intelligence organization in Chaotian? Jingjiu knew. As long as one lived long enough, one would always know some secrets. What's more, his senior brother loved to ask about secrets and then tell him stories. Entering the clinic, Jingjiu took off his bamboo hat. Just as he was about to ask if the begonia was still the same, the doctor hurriedly raised his right hand, indicating that there was no need to say anything. He then led him and Zhao Liu into the inner room. That doesn't seem to be against the rules, Jingjiu said. The doctor forced a smile and said, I can tell you're Jingjiu just by looking at your face. Last time, the Curtain Rollers had already guessed his identity and had confirmed it later. Since that was the case, there was no need to use the old secret code that had not been used for hundreds of years. Jingjiu didn't think about the hidden meaning in this matter. He felt that it was a good thing that he didn't need to use the secret code to avoid some trouble. He said directly, Where is Tian Jingren? The doctor looked at him and said seriously, "This is very high-level news." Jing Jiao said, "I gave you 3 pieces of information last time." The doctor smiled and said, "There are 2 pieces of information that haven't been confirmed. As for what I owe you, we're even now." Jing Jiao thought for a while and said, "Since you know I'm Jing Jiao, can you guess who she is?" The doctor looked at the girl beside him and couldn't help but be stunned. If he was Jing Jiao, then she was naturally Zhao Liu. The curtain rollers naturally attached great importance to this person with natural Taoist quality and the youngest peak master in the history of the Aoyama sect. They had collected a lot of relevant information. Normally, as a senior manager of the curtain rollers, the doctor should have recognized Zhao Liu the moment she walked into the clinic with Jing Jiao. The problem was that the information clearly stated that Zhao Liu didn't care about trifles and didn't care about her appearance or dress then. What was the little yellow flower in her hair? A moment later, the doctor came back to his senses and understood what Jing Jiao meant. The reason he gave the information to Jing Jiao last time was because the curtain rollers owed him something. Now that Zhao Liu was here, how could he go back empty-handed? This information is very expensive. Please don't tell others. Since the doctor had made the decision, he told them the location without hesitation. Tian Jingren had been living in the plum garden since he came to Zhaoga City. Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu had just come from the plum garden. So this plum garden was not the coal platform on the high mountain where the plum meeting was being held, but the old plum garden. In the clinic, Zhao Liu didn't speak a word, nor did she ask about the relationship between Jing Jiao and the curtain rollers. She didn't speak until they came to the old street. I've lived in Zhaoga City since I was a child, but I seldom went out for cultivation. This is the first time I've come here. Many years ago, the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom invaded, and the imperial court lost its legitimacy. The emperor and the young leaders of the orthodox cultivation sects formed an alliance in the plum garden. This was the origin of the plum meeting. The current plum garden was the most magnificent building in Zhaoga City, but it was not the same place as before. The real plum garden was at the end of this old street. Zhao Liu hadn't been here before, and few people remembered this place. In comparison to the bustling new plum garden, the real plum garden was more like a relic that no one would pay homage to. Wearing the conical hat, Jing Jiao looked in the direction of the plum meeting in the distance. He saw some tree branches and an old pavilion, looking desolate. Back when the plum meeting was held, he was at the critical moment of breaking through the state, so he couldn't participate in it. Even if he could, he wouldn't have come for some reason. His big brother came. The former sect master of the Zhongzhou school came, and the old chief monk of the Guoqing temple, the master of the Zen master, also came. Lien Sanyue was killing people at the time, so the chief nun of the Shui Yununnery came. Jing Jiao was pulled back from his rare recollection by the noise of quarreling. The people on the street were not the tourists who came to admire the old plum garden, but the row of chess stalls by the street. Since there were chess stalls, there were chess players who liked to play chess, and there were also idlers who wanted to watch the games. All in all, the people on the street were lively, so it was natural that it would be lively. The yells of fighting, laughter, swearing, and the sounds of the chess pieces hitting the chessboards could be heard everywhere on the street. The air was filled with the stink of sweat, feet, and smoke. Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu walked on the street amidst these noises and smells, but the expressions under the conical hat didn't change a bit. As they were about to reach the end of the street, the crooked trees of the old plum garden came into view. Jing Jiao suddenly halted his steps and looked to the right. Zhao Liu was taken aback a bit and looked in the same direction. It was a chess stall. It was not a game of chess, but a game of chess. The chess stall was crowded with people. The people's faces were full of surprise and bewilderment. There was one person standing in front of all the people. That person's face was very young, with red lips and white teeth. He looked like a youth, but his expression was extremely arrogant and cold. His arrogant appearance was disgusting. He looked at the stall owner and said, "You've lost. Get lost." It seemed that he was gambling with the stall owner, not with gold or silver, but with whether he would stay or leave. Seeing that he was so unyielding, the people couldn't help but get angry and shout, "Be more polite. You only won one game by a fluke." Why are you so arrogant? Right? If you have the guts, play another game. The young man didn't pay any attention to them and went straight to the next chess stall. This chess stall had a game of chess on display. The young man glanced at it, put his hand on the chessboard, and made a horse move. The people were still angry at this person's arrogant attitude and cursed him incessantly. The stall owner who had lost was also unconvinced and shouted, "I'm not leaving. What do you do about it?" Suddenly, the surroundings became quiet, and the stall owner who had just lost also shut his mouth, because they found that the owner of the game of chess had an extremely unsightly expression on his face, sweat pouring down like waterfall. Get lost. Chapter 127. The street outside the old plum garden was where most of the chess stalls were located in Xiaoga City. Some of the owners of the chess stalls were the highly achieved swordsmen in the marketplace, and some of them were the bored disciples of the large chess houses. Of course, some of them used the chess boards to cheat others. The Go game was the most important and the least important, and it was the most convenient way to cheat others of their money. It usually took only one step to solve the Go game, but nobody could think of that step. This Go game had been placed at the end of the street for 10 years, and nobody had solved it yet. Even the highly achieved swordsmen of the large chess houses couldn't solve it. The sudden quietness came from the first step the young man took. The crowd guessed a possibility from the expression on the face of the owner of the Go game, and they were shocked speechless. The owner of the first chess stall and the owner of the Go game were not only neighbors, but also brothers of the same master. He was fully aware of how difficult or insidious this Go game was. After his master taught them this Go game, it became the biggest secret among them, helping them win a great deal of money. No matter how the disciples of the large chess houses tempted them or threatened them, they didn't tell them about it. 6 years ago, his young brother had one of his hands broken because of it. But why did this person take the first step? Could it be that he had seen through the secret of this endgame at a glance? He exchanged a glance with the owner of the Go game, and they both saw the shock in each other's eyes. Since this person could solve the Go game taught by his master so easily, he must be a chess player from China. But why did someone with such an amazing chess skill come here? Even if there were some highly achieved swordsmen hiding in the chess stalls on this street, they were all in the front street. The place where they set up the Go games was near the Barren Garden, and few people came to the stalls, so the location was not good to begin with. Did this person come here to target him? Or was he a highly achieved swordsman hired by a chess house? Thinking of this, the first stall owner was shocked and angry, yelling, "We won't leave. What can you do about it?" The young man with the tender face had already come to the front of the third chess stall. Hearing this, he turned around and glanced at the first stall owner, saying expressionlessly, "If you don't leave, you'll die." The first stall owner was about to say something, but he suddenly felt cold all over when he saw the young man's gaze. The others had the same feeling, as if the spring in Xiaoga City had gone away in an instant, and the world had returned to the cold winter. Shaking the world with a single thought was a technique of cultivators. The owner of the Go puzzle turned pale and quickly walked out. He used his trembling hand to stop his senior brother, indicating for him to stop speaking. His hand had been broken 6 years ago at the behest of some idlers from the chess house. Because of this, his hand would tremble whenever it was cloudy or when he was afraid. Knowing that the young man was a Taoist cultivator, the crowd became fearful and scattered in all directions. "What business do you have, immortal master?" It was the street with the largest number of chess stalls in Xiaoga City. Though the profits weren't great, there were still profits to be had. As such, there was someone in charge. When a person like the young man came to stir up trouble, the steward had to come out and settle the matter. Everyone looked at the middle-aged man in a green robe and bowed, saying respectfully, "Mr. He." That Mr. He was a disciple of the Chuanxi chess house in Xiaoga City. He had an ordinary status, but he was a respected figure on this street. The owner of the Chuanxi chess house was Prince Chung, who loved playing chess. As such, Mr. He didn't fear that young man too much. Of course, he still spoke respectfully. The two brothers, the owner of the chess stall and the owner of the Go puzzle, eyed each other in surprise and bewilderment, thinking that this young man wasn't invited by the Chunchi chess house. The young man glanced at Mr. He and said expressionlessly, "My purpose is simple, to drive all of you away." "May I know the reason?" asked Mr. He with a stern expression. The young man looked up at the sky and said, "It's simple. It's because you people aren't qualified to play chess." All the people on the street had learned of what had happened, gathering around them. Hearing what the young man said, there was an uproar. Mr. He's expression changed slightly, saying, "Immortal Master has an extraordinary chess skill. Why do you have to—" He didn't finish his sentence, but his meaning was clear. Why would a cultivation practitioner bully the weak? Yet, he didn't realize that this was a chess game, not a fight. The young man didn't heed him. He turned to the chess stall and said, "If you lose, get lost. If I lose, I die." His expression was nonchalant, not because he didn't care about life and death, but because he had absolute confidence in himself. As he spoke, he didn't look at the owner of the chess stall, but at a wild grass on the eaves. This was the so-called arrogance. It was really unpleasant. Mr. He, the stall owner, and the onlookers all felt very unpleasant. "Let's play. I don't believe you can beat so many of us," someone shouted. It was obvious that the young man intended to drive away all the chess stalls on the street. His idea and behavior had already aroused the public's anger. On this street, there were those who set up Go puzzles to cheat money, those who set up Go games to win money, and those highly skilled chess players who came here to play games, as well as the disciples of the Chunchi chess house like Mr. He. The further they walked down the street, the higher the level of the chess masters at the stalls. No matter how good this young man was at playing chess, how could he keep winning? Moreover, if he pushed the crowd too far, it was not impossible for him to invite a few famous chess masters for Jiaoga City. In the noisy and chaotic environment, the young man didn't change his expression. He waved his hand to signal for the owner of the chess stall to go first. Zhao Liu fixed her gaze on the Go board. "This is called Xiangqi," said Jingjiu. "Though I don't know how to play Go, I know it." Zhao Liu shot him a glance. She wanted to say something, but didn't. Jingjiu knew what she was worried about. He looked at the young man with a tender face, who looked like a child. This young man wasn't really arrogant, but his eyebrows were a bit light, so the position of his eyes looked a bit high, giving people the feeling that he was looking down on others from a higher position. It seemed that he looked down on everyone in the world, especially in front of the Go board. This reminded Jingjiu of that old friend again, the old friend whom the zither music in the mountain reminded him of. This young man played Go just like that old friend of his killed people. The flames of war lasted for 3 months. They didn't drink tea while sitting opposite each other. Jingjiu had a complicated feeling, so he didn't want to watch it any longer. "Let's go. It's too noisy here." It was true that Jiaoga City was too noisy today, and everyone was quarreling. At the plum meeting, the zither music and the cheers, the flute, and the birds had been quarreling for a long time. Outside the royal palace, the sounds of the wooden wheels rubbing against the green stone slabs and the crisp sound of the teacups falling to the ground were very annoying. By the long street, the chess pieces landed heavily on the Go board, and the cheers and sighs rose one after another, gradually falling behind them. As soon as they arrived at the front of the old garden, the world became quieter, and the sounds of cheers and sighs could be heard in the deep part of the plum forest. The sound was very gentle and pleasant, like the bead curtain knocking against each other in the wind, or the raindrops falling down from the lotus leaves. Zhao Liu was surprised, asking, "The Platonist sect?" It was quiet in the old garden, and the plum trees were covered with dust. There were no tourists here, but there were many remnants of the energy of the formations. Those formations were very powerful. It was a bit difficult for Jingjiu and Zhao Liu to break them in their current cultivation states. Unless Zhao Liu used the thoughtless sword, or Jingjiu did it himself. Fortunately, someone had entered the plum forest and broken these formations. It was these bell sounds that broke the formations. Jingjiu arched his eyebrows. It seemed that the little girl was more anxious than them. Chapter 128. The ringing of the bell was pleasant to the ears, as good as the zither music at the plum meeting that day. and it had a special effect, making the listeners calm down. The air around the plum forest seemed to form layers of invisible ripples, smoothing the surface of the small lake. Besides the calming effect, the residual energy of the formations had also gradually disappeared, leaving no trace behind. It was evident that these formations had been forcefully broken by a highly achieved swordsman of the Platonist sect, and that highly achieved swordsman must have broken into the garden by now. The Platonist sect and the Aoyama sect had been on good terms for generations, so Zhao Lei was a bit worried. She held Jingjiu's hand and flew up on her sword. A red sword light illuminated the old garden, following the ringing of the bell. A gentle breeze arose, and everything calmed down instantly. There was an ordinary small lake in the deep part of the old plum garden, with some messy and ugly plum trees growing by the lake. A small nunnery could be vaguely seen in the middle of the plum forest, nothing special about it. The path leading to the small nunnery outside the forest was blocked by someone, and the two sides were confronting each other. "Why can't we go in?" a woman asked with a cold expression, her seemingly thin body exuding a powerful energy. This woman was the envoy who had participated in the sword trial of Aoyama years ago. Standing by her side was a young girl with an impatient expression on her pretty face. She was a young girl who had promised to give Jingjiu and Zhao Lei bells. Standing on a stone path was an old eunuch. He wasn't the one who had set up those formations, but it was obvious that he wanted to block these two people of the Platonist sect as well. The old eunuch said expressionlessly with drooping eyelids, "A noble is enjoying the flowers in the forest. Please wait for a moment." The woman sneered, "Don't think you can intimidate us by bringing out the noble from the royal palace." When did the old plum garden become a forbidden place for the royal family? The young girl couldn't wait any longer, so she said directly, "Aunt Shui, don't talk nonsense with them. Let's go in directly." The old eunuch lifted his head, his eyes emitting a sharp light as he yelled, "Who dares?" Following these two words, the auras in the forest suddenly became chaotic. A dozen or so figures could be vaguely seen. Judging from their auras, they should be the strong guards of the palace. Just as the swords of the two sides were about to clash, a cool breeze suddenly appeared, and ripples appeared on the surface of the water again, scattering the red sword light into countless maple leaves. The sword light suddenly disappeared, and two figures appeared by the lake. Zhao Lei said, "Who dares?" It was the same two words. The old eunuch's shout was full of power, but her tone was ordinary, light, and without any imposing manner. But for some reason, whether it was the old eunuch himself or the palace guards in the forest, they all felt that her question was truly difficult to answer. Or rather, no one dared to answer this question. After saying this, Zhao Lei remembered to let go of Jingjiu's hand. The old eunuch fixed his gaze on Zhao Lei and Jingjiu's faces. Thinking of the red sword light, he guessed their identities. His expression changed abruptly, and he raised his hand hastily to signal the guards in the forest not to act recklessly. Seeing Zhao Lei, the young girl showed a pleasantly surprised smile. She skipped to her side and held her hand, asking, "Aren't you two at the plum meeting?" "Let me have a look," said Zhao Lei. "You two know it too?" The young girl said embarrassedly. "Our sect has paid a great price for this information. We promised not to tell anyone else, so it's not convenient for me to inform you." Zhao Lei smiled and rubbed her head, indicating that it was all right. Having done this, she felt it was a bit strange that she was so used to such an intimate action. She glanced at Jingjiu reflexively. The old eunuch was also looking at Jingjiu. The face that had been described as exaggerated in the rumors appeared in front of him, and he realized that those descriptions were not exaggerated at all. To put it more precisely, when he saw Jingjiu's face, he realized that the true extreme was indescribable. Even though he was an old eunuch, he had to spend some effort to calm himself down. He bowed and said, "Please wait a moment. This old servant will inform." After confirming the identities of Zhao Lei and Jingjiu, his attitude became more respectful. He was about to ask the guards to inform the nobility in the forest, but he didn't even have time to say the word nobility. It was because Jingjiu didn't want to wait any longer. As far as Jing Jiu was concerned, time was both the most meaningless and the most meaningful thing at the same time. There were many things worth waiting for, like the first snowfall, the initial growth of the Dao tree, the accumulation of sand, and the return of Lu Shui. But waiting to inform the nobility was definitely not one of them. Zhao Lei was also such a person. They walked along the stone path toward the forest. The old eunuch hesitated, but he didn't dare block their way. He stepped aside to make way for them. The young girl of the Platonist sect followed them into the forest while holding Zhao Lei's hand. She snorted contentedly when she passed by the old eunuch. The stone path led to the deep part of the plum forest. Though the trees were sparse, they couldn't see the scenery behind them. There was a bamboo wall in the deep part of the forest, and the stone path led to the nunnery through the bamboo wall. It was quiet on the other side of the bamboo wall. It seemed that the old eunuch and the guards were not allowed to enter the nunnery. The old woman said apologetically, "The Aoyama sect is more important." Zhao Lei said, "Big Sister Chui is too serious. It's just that the two sects have different styles of doing things." The old woman understood what she meant, thinking that it was indeed the case, but she didn't know how to respond. The young girl, however, didn't care about all this. She said directly, "That's right. My mother has been nagging that your catchphrases are too scary, that you always ask people if they want to die, and that you are too violent, that you always want people to die. It's really annoying. She has warned me over and over again not to learn from you." The old woman smiled bitterly without saying anything. She looked at Zhao Lei and was about to explain. Unexpectedly, Zhao Lei thought about what she said seriously and said, "That makes sense." The young girl was surprised, asking, "Sister, are you going to change it?" Zhao Lei thought about it again and shook her head, saying, "Though it makes sense, I can't change it." The young girl asked curiously with her eyes wide open, "Why?" Zhao Lei said, "Because there are too many people in the world who deserve to die and those who want to die." The young girl noticed that her eyes were clear and spirited. She was somewhat envious, or in other words, yearning. There was a tree in front of the nunnery. It had already bloomed, and the petals were falling onto the tree. But they weren't as pretty as the beautiful woman under the tree. The beautiful woman turned around and looked at them. Her eyes and brows were extremely beautiful, only a bit inferior to Jingjiu's. More importantly, her expression was honest and straightforward, giving off an air of innocence. Such a beautiful woman was usually liked by the men. As a result, the young girls of the Platonist sect didn't like her, and neither did Zhao Lei. The old woman came forward and bowed, saying, "Greetings, royal concubine who." The young girl said in a low voice beside Zhao Lei, "She's the most favored royal concubine who." Hearing this, Zhao Lei was taken aback a bit, looking at the tree again. It was then that the beautiful woman looked at her as well. Their gazes met through the falling petals in the wind. Chapter 129. A few years ago, Jing Jiu and Zhao Lei left the Aoyama sect and traveled tens of thousands of miles until they arrived in Haizhou. They reappeared in the human world for the Four Seas banquet. On their journey, they encountered many demons, humans, and cultivation practitioners, and killed all of them with a swing of their swords. The chief monk of the Black Dragon Temple, Zhu Gui, was one of them. This so-called highly achieved monk was fond of prostitutes and had done many evil deeds in secret. Nobody dared to stop him because he had a good relationship with royal concubine Hu in the palace. Unfortunately, he met Zhao Lei and died without hesitation. Royal concubine Hu was furious when she heard of this and swore to avenge Zhu Gui. The Pure Heaven Bureau sent so many people to pursue the criminals, mostly because they were under too much pressure from the palace. Nobody expected that it was Zhao Lei, the peak master of the 9th peak of the Aoyama sect, who killed Zhu Gui. The Pure Heaven Bureau had suffered a great setback, and the vice inspector, Shi Fengchun, was pushed aside and lost all his power. Could royal concubine Hu really let go of this grudge? Everybody knew it was impossible. Zhao Lei was well aware of this. But looking at the beautiful woman under the tree, she didn't feel any fear, not even a sense of discomfort. Even though she was the most favored royal concubine of the emperor, she couldn't threaten and kill a peak master of the Aoyama sect. Royal concubine whose gaze lingered on Zhao Liu and Jingjiu for a moment, anger flashing in her eyes. "So you're Zhao Liu?" she said. "Yes," Zhao Liu said calmly. Royal concubine who seemed to have thought of something, as she curled up the corners of her mouth and said with a smile, "Your mother came to the palace during the New Year's Day, and I saw her once. She was a bit far away, so I couldn't see her clearly. But I vaguely remember that Madame Zhao was very beautiful and gentle. You are far inferior to your mother." What she said sounded simple, but it was not. She was obviously mocking Zhao Liu, but nobody could say anything. The so-called distance meant that Madame Zhao's status was not high enough, and she was not close enough to her. She also said that Zhao Liu was not as good as her mother, and Zhao Liu could not refute it. Otherwise, could she say that her mother was not as good as her? This was the method that the women in the palace were most proficient in. The confrontation between words was rather sharp and secretive, making it very difficult to parry. Zhao Liu wasn't a little girl, so she didn't know how to do this, but she had her own way of dealing with it. "I will tell my mother not to enter the palace anymore." Upon hearing this, the expression on royal concubine whose face changed slightly, as she realized that her opponents that day were not those delicate sisters in the palace, but the important figures in the cultivation circle. Zhao Liu was now the peak master of Aoyama. No matter how one looked at it, she was someone that the imperial court had to respect. Even if she was an imperial concubine, what right did she have to threaten him? If he really used some official means, he was afraid that he would get himself into trouble. As for whether Zhao Liu's parents would do anything to her because of their greed for the power in the mortal world, it was impossible. As long as Zhao Liu gave the order, her father would resign without hesitation, and her mother would not enter the palace again. The entire Zhao clan might even move to Nanhezu. It was because the next 1,000 years of the Zhao clan would depend on her. The seemingly innocent royal concubine, who was of course a very smart person since she could win the favor of the emperor. She figured it all out in a short time. The more she figured it out, the more upset she felt. She picked up an embroidery needle and was about to embroider a flower and a bird to compete with her opponent, but her opponent didn't follow the routine and slashed the needle in half. The upset royal concubine who didn't want to talk to Zhao Liu anymore. She turned to the young girl of the Platonist sect and said, "Sensei, long time no see." The young girl snorted once, ignoring her. Royal concubine who said with a smile, "Well, you're so vengeful at such a young age. Don't forget that I made the lotus cake for you back then." The young girl said, "Royal concubine who, you stopped me from coming in earlier. Why do you want to get close to me now? I was only 4 years old when my mother brought me to Xiaoga City last time, and I don't remember anything. Are you not a child now?" Royal concubine who said, "I didn't let you in for your own good." The young girl curled her lips and said, "You're worried that the nunnery will choose me." Seeing the expressions on Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu's faces, the woman of the Platonist sect explained. It turned out that Tian Jingren had a rule that he could only see 3 people a day. It was very quiet in the nunnery at the moment. Lo Huainan might be in there, so there were only 2 people left. Royal concubine who wanted to stop the rest of the people from coming in. Royal concubine who asked, "You're a young girl. What important questions do you have to ask? What about you?" The young girl sneered, "All you want is to give birth to a child for the emperor. What's the point of asking about it? It's something that needs to be done." As soon as she said this, the atmosphere in the room became a bit awkward. It was well known that royal concubine who was favored by the emperor, and she had always been favored by the emperor. She was undoubtedly the most important person in the royal palace. The only problem was that she didn't have a child. Even if one knew about it, he or she could only keep it to himself. No one would point it out, especially in front of royal concubine who. Royal concubine who was a bit angry, but she managed to hold it back. She said with a faint smile, "You're just a little child. How would you know anything about having a child? What are you going to do?" As she spoke, She bit her lips and teeth slightly, and her eyes wavered, displaying a natural alluring intent. The woman of the Platonist sect was a bit displeased. The young girl blushed slightly and spat out, saying, "You're really a vixen." Jingjiu thought, "You're right." Royal concubine whose cultivation state was even higher than that of Zhao Leu in Haizhou City. Though Zhao Leu couldn't see through her true identity, Jingjiu could see through her. Jingjiu narrowed his eyes, thinking that this vixen was still naturally alluring even though she had been enlightened by the Buddhists and could easily make people indulge in lustful pleasures. If he met the emperor, he would have to warn him. It was then that a young man came up the stone path. The young man wore a plain embroidered cloth, with a small green leaf hanging from his belt. The leaf had some dust on it, which should have fallen from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The young man concealed his energy very well, so it was hard to tell his cultivation level. But as he walked, a noble aura could be sensed. Seeing the young man, royal concubine who was quite surprised. She nodded slightly in greeting, but she still stood on the same spot with a hesitant expression on her face. The young man came before her and said expressionlessly, "My father has a child. What do you want to ask?" Royal concubine who was a bit angry, but she couldn't say anything because of the identity of the young man. All she could do was twitch her mouth to express her dissatisfaction. Seeing this, Zhao Leu couldn't help but smile when she recalled that the young girl of the Platonist sect had also twitched her mouth to express her dissatisfaction. She couldn't help but feel less resentful toward this royal concubine. The young man turned to Zhao Leu and said coldly, "Are you a cultivationist from the Aoyama sect?" Zhao Leu shot a glance at Jingjiu. Jingjiu looked at the young girl of the Platonist sect and asked, "You are called Sei? Sei as in the Garden of Spring?" The young girl felt a bit uneasy. She shot a glance at the young man and said in a low voice, "It's Sei as in the Banjiang Sensei." The young man said, "I think it's Sei as in the Shivering Sensei." Jingjiu said to Zhao Leu, "So it's Sei as in the Proud Sei." Chapter 130. The first few sentences were incoherent, as if they were hiding hidden meanings. In fact, they were just tit for tat. The young man in the brocade robe didn't introduce himself when he asked Zhao Leu if she was a fellow cultivator of Aoyama's sect. His expression was cold and impolite. Zhao Leu glanced at Jingjiu, wanting to know how Jingjiu was going to deal with it. Through the conversation between the young man in embroidered clothing and the royal concubine, who, the woman of the Platonist sect, had vaguely guessed his identity, she was shocked speechless, and even the young girl sensei felt uneasy. The identity of the young man in embroidered robes was indeed respectable. It was understandable that he treated Aoyama's sect coldly. The current emperor trusted the Guocheng temple the most, while the imperial family was still closest to Zhongzhou school. As the Aoyama sect that was as famous as Zhongzhou school and had been competing for the position of the leader of the righteous path for more than 1,000 years, it was naturally impossible for them to gain the favor of the royal family, especially with the identity of a young man in embroidered clothes. If he wanted to obtain the full support of Zhongzhou school, he had to express a clear attitude at all times and on all occasions. These were all understandable things. Jingjiu knew this very well, but he would not try to understand it because he did not care about the other party's identity at all. His attitude was even clearer than that of the young man in embroidered robes. He spoke directly to the young girl and asked for her name, as if the young man in embroidered robes did not exist. This was disregard. The young man in embroidered clothes narrowed his eyes and didn't say anything else. What he feared most was a sudden silence. Especially Sensei. She had always been a lively little girl. More importantly, she thought that Jingjiu and Zhao Lei didn't know the identity of the young man in embroidered clothes, so she was worried that something would go wrong. She quickly took out 2 small bells and handed them to Zhao Leu, saying, "It took me a lot of effort to get these 2. This was the gift she promised to give to Zhao Leu and Jingjiu when she left Aoyama's sect. The Platonist sect's clear heart bell is unparalleled in the world. She was the sect master's biological daughter, so the bell that she had painstakingly begged for was naturally not ordinary. The two little bells were completely unmarked, and their design was exquisite. They were incomparably transparent, and they emitted a faint, clear light. Just a glance at them was enough to calm one's heart. Seeing this, royal concubine who felt a bit jealous, and the expression on the face of the young man in embroidered clothing changed slightly. His identity was extremely noble. Ever since he was born, a bell given by the Platonist sect was tied to his ankle to ward off evil spirits and protect his heart. At this moment, the two bells that the little girl took out were of a similar grade to his bells. The problem was, how could Zhao Liu and Jing Jiu be mentioned in the same breath as him? Even if the Platonist sect and the Aoyama sect have been on good terms for generations, the old lady would never allow her granddaughter to give away such a precious treasure. Wasn't this just nonsense? Zhao Liu took the bell and nodded to express her gratitude, saying, "I haven't found a suitable sword for you yet. Wait a little longer." Sensei waved her hand to indicate that she was not in a hurry. Then, she looked at Jingjiu, showing a proud smile on her small face. "You are different from Sister Zhao. I think it's a waste for me to give you these bells. You have to give me something else in return, in addition to what you promised me." Only a little girl would ask for something in return after giving away a gift. Yet, Jingjiu thought it was quite normal, and he thought about it carefully. He still had many precious medicines and magic treasures, but he would use some of them when he broke through the state in the future. He would leave some for Lu Shisui and Zhao Liu, and he had to prepare a good one for Gu Qin. Now that young man Yuan had joined the Shenma Peak, and the little Yushan might come back someday, the ninth peak would have more disciples in the future. As for the cultivation methods, he still remembered many of them, including 2 remnant volumes of the Zen master from the Guocheng Temple. But the little girl would definitely cultivate the cultivation methods of the Platonist sect, so these were not suitable for her. Besides, giving them to her would always cause some trouble. Then, he thought of a very simple and useful gift. Jingjiu looked at the little girl and said, "I can help you with one thing." The little girl didn't understand and asked, "What is it?" Jingjiu said, "Think about it yourself. When you need me to do something, just tell me." Hearing this, Zhao Liu glanced at him, feeling a bit surprised. She knew very well that Jingjiu was a natural cultivation practitioner and didn't have much affection for the things in the world. In other words, he didn't want to have too much contact with the things in the world. But he was willing to make such a request. No matter what it was a big deal. The little girl didn't feel anything at first, but when she saw Zhao Liu's expression, she vaguely realized that she had made a great bargain. Her eyes brightened and she asked, "Anything?" Jingjiu said, "Anything. If you can do anything, then you can't do anything." A voice came out from the quiet old nunnery. The voice was loud and clear, but it didn't give off any oppressive feeling, making people feel comfortable. It was warm and comforting, but it was persuasive and infectious. It sounded like the evening bell of an old temple. A person walked out from the nunnery. That person was tall and big, with a peaceful expression on his face, but he had a brave and resolute expression. The royal concubine who greeted that person with a faint smile, looking quite amiable. The woman of the Platonist sect greeted that person respectfully. The tall man said to the little girl mildly, "At least you can't ask him to do evil things that go against the way of the Xianxia heroes, and you can't ask him to hurt himself." Sensei had guessed who he was, but she didn't refute him, her eyes beaming slightly. "It's just one thing. It doesn't have to be so troublesome." Jingjiu said. The young man in embroidered clothing said sarcastically, "Will you commit suicide if she asks you to do it?" Jingjiu said while staring into his eyes, "I'm not an idiot." Hearing this, the young man in embroidered clothing got a bit angry, asking, "What's the point?" "I'll judge by myself," said Jingjiu. The young man in embroidered clothing sneered. "If you can find a reason not to do anything, what's the point of agreeing to this condition?" Jingjiu said, "She will believe me because I believe her. It makes sense." "Jingjiu, you are a good-looking man, and your words are pleasant to hear." The little girl sensei praised Jingjiu while putting her palms together, and then said helplessly, All the more reason that you can't go to my house. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the Grandmaster will kill you. Others might not understand it, but Jing Jiao and Zhao Leiyu could. It was because the little girl had talked about this topic when they were in Aoyama. She was worried that the Grandmaster would kill Jing Jiao because she was worried that her mother would fall in love with Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao is indeed the rumored Jing Jiao. His thinking is meticulous and flawless. The tall man said this while looking at Jing Jiao. The crowd didn't understand what he meant. Jing Jiao didn't say anything. What the tall man said next explained the reason. In Aoyama, your seniority is higher than Nan Shan's, and Nan Shan is open-minded. Even if you break his sword with a trick, he won't do anything. The tall man looked into Jing Jiao's eyes and said, "But I'm not as good as Nan Shan. I'm more straightforward. If I have the chance, I'll break your sword to avenge him." The two sects were separated. Jing Jiao was the senior of Guanan Shan, the first disciple of Aoyama, but not Jing Jiao Sr. His tone was calm, even gentle, but it was hard to believe, as if Jing Jiao's sword had been broken. Zhao Leiyu glanced at him, and a cold light flashed in her eyes. It was sword light. The meaning was simple and clear. There are only two kinds of it, and it was not concealed at all. It was the will to fight and the will to kill. Want to break Jing Jiao's sword? Even if you're Lo Huainan. Chapter 131. The tall man who walked out of the old nunnery was Lo Huainan. He was the first disciple of the Zhongzhou school's headmaster, the undisputed strongest cultivator of the younger generation. He had many other titles, but none of them were as famous as his name itself. Looking at Zhao Leiyu's distinct black and white eyes, and thinking of the cold light from before, Lo Huainan felt a little awestruck. Of course he knew who Zhao Leiyu was. She was so young and had such a high state. She would be the most outstanding person in any sect in the world. But in his opinion, she was still too young and her state was still shallow. It would take a long time before she could become a real opponent. He did not expect Zhao Leiyu's sword heart to be so sharp. She was indeed of natural Taoist quality. But how could she be just that? It seemed that the rumors were true. Nanshan was right. She had practiced that extremely dangerous method to the extreme. Could she really cultivate an acquired sword body by using the tempered body of sword will? Zhao Leiyu took a step forward. Lo Huainan looked at her in silence, waiting for her to speak. Obviously, he was much more cautious. This was also a sign of respect. At this moment, Jing Jiao raised his left hand. Zhao Leiyu understood what he meant. She did not speak and retreated to his side. Just like when they were in the small village and at the South Pine Pavilion, Lu Shisui knew Jing Jiao's meaning with a gesture or even a look. Now Zhao Leiyu could do it too. Lo Huainan was a little surprised. There were very few things in the world that could surprise him, because he was very surprised. Whether in the Aoyama sword sect or in the world, Zhao Leiyu's reputation was extremely well known. Jing Jiao was more like a follower. If it were not for his extremely beautiful face and the occasional sharp edge, he would probably be even more low-key and unknown. But this scene showed that the Shima Peak was led by Jing Jiao. Why was that? Lo Huainan suddenly thought of another rumor. In this year's sword trial of Aoyama, before Jing Jiao broke Guananshan's flying sword, he defeated Gu Han of Liangwang Peak with a trick. It was said that at the most critical moment, Jing Jiao used some kind of Dao technique and brought along several sword shadows to traverse a distance of over 100 feet in the air. A few elders of Aoyama's sect suspected that it was the innate invisible sword body. The sword sect of Aoyama wanted to hide this news, but with so many eyes and ears watching and listening, how could they hide it? In the end, the news spread out of the mountain. When Lo Huainan heard this rumor, she did not believe it at all. But when he saw this scene, he suddenly had an unimaginable thought. Could it be that the rumor was true, and it wasn't fake news that the Aoyama sword sect purposely released to disturb the thoughts of other sects? If it was true, with an innate invisible sword body and an acquired sword body, what would the Shinma Peak of Aoyama look like in the future? Jing Jiao did not let Zhao Leiyu speak. He did not speak either, because this was their own business, and there was no need to tell others. Lo Huainan took a deep look at him and did not say anything. She cupped her hands and bowed to the crowd again and left on her own. There was one detail. From the beginning to the end, he did not speak to the young man in embroidered clothes. He did not even look at him. The scene became quiet again. Lo Huainan had left, and there should be 2 places left for today. But there were still 5 people outside the nunnery. Zhao Liu glanced at Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao shook his head. The young man in embroidered clothes said in a mocking tone, "Even the reckless Lo Huainan doesn't dare take another step forward. It looks like the rumored Jing Jiao has many secrets. Are you worried that the Heavenly Master will discover them?" Jing Jiao ignored him and asked Zhao Liu, "Worried?" Zhao Liu said, "I'm not sure. If the master in the nunnery was as rumored to be able to forestall one's future, predict one's life and death, and reach the path of heaven, who would want to miss this opportunity? Yet, she had many secrets in her heart, and she did not want that master to discover them." Jing Jiao asked, "What secrets?" Zhao Liu said, "The ones you know." The question and the answer were very natural, but the others could sense many other meanings in the conversation. For example, absolute trust and intimacy. Royal concubine who rolled her eyes, saying nothing. "Are you trying to say that they are a pair of lovers?" Sensei said with a smile. Royal concubine who covered her mouth with her sleeve and said with an enchanting smile, "You said it. Don't blame it on me." Seeing her natural flirtatious behavior, the young man in embroidered clothes frowned slightly, not disguising his disgust. It was then that a child walked out of the old nunnery. He walked to the front of the young man in embroidered clothes and bowed to him, saying, "The teacher said that it's related to the destiny of heaven, so he can't see it. Young master, please go back." The young man in embroidered clothes felt a bit disappointed, and then he seemed to have thought of something, lost in thought. The sunlight of spring penetrated the branches of the plum forest and shone on his face. The large patches of sunlight didn't make his face look strange, but instead made it look more radiant. Under the sunlight, the contours of his face became clearer, just like what he saw in the future, making the corners of his mouth curl up. With a satisfied smile, the young man in embroidered clothes left the plum forest, heading in the opposite direction of Lo Huainan. Royal concubine who didn't understand what the young man in embroidered clothes meant. She mocked him in a low voice while looking at the back of the young man in embroidered clothes. Sensei said sympathetically, he understood the meaning of the sentence, so he smiled. Royal concubine who was taken aback, asking, "What do you mean? Didn't the Heavenly Master say that he wouldn't let him see it?" "The Heavenly Master said that it's related to the destiny of heaven." Sensei emphasized the last 2 words. Royal concubine who had finally figured it out, her expression changing abruptly. She of course knew what the young man in embroidered clothes wanted to ask, which was the destiny of heaven. Sensei comforted her while looking at her. "In that case, you don't have to ask anymore. Even if you can have a son, he can't be the crown prince. On the contrary, he will have to live in fear. Why bother?" Royal concubine whose body swayed slightly, her face pale, unable to speak. Unexpectedly, the child walked to the front of royal concubine who bowed to her and said the same thing. "The teacher said that it's related to the destiny of heaven, so he can't see it. Please go back, Your Highness." Royal concubine who was taken aback. A moment later, an ecstatic expression showed on her face. She thanked him repeatedly and left the plum forest without staying any longer. Jing Jiao thought that the temperament of the emperor hadn't changed much since this woman had lived in the palace for so long, and was still as benevolent as before. But why didn't the emperor teach his son well? The expression on Zhao Liu's face was grave, and so was the expression on the face of the woman of the Platonist sect. The behavior of the young man in embroidered clothes and royal concubine, who was no different from that of the commoners in Zhaoga City. Their conversation was like the hostile gossip between the neighbors. Yet, outside the plum garden, there were the important figures who could influence the whole imperial court. What had happened here that day, and what the child had said, would probably be the future of the human imperial court. Chapter 132. The destiny was above, and it had nothing to do with the human world. Only the emperor was the key to the future of the human race, so the matters related to the emperor could be called the destiny. The young man in embroidered cloth wanted to ask about the succession of the emperor, and the royal concubine who wanted to ask about her children, both of which were related to the destiny. Yet, Tian Jingren used the same words to refuse their requests. What was the deeper meaning behind it? It's just a common trick used by the fortune tellers. As I said, the one in the nunnery is very good at bluffing. Jing Jiu said to Zhao Liu. Zhao Liu wondered if it was so simple. The child was very angry, saying, "Even the emperor and the godly swordsman show great respect to my teacher. Who are you? How dare you be so rude to my teacher?" Jing Jiu said calmly, "If it's not a trick of the fortune teller, how do you explain these two sentences?" The child sneered, "My teacher is very knowledgeable, and his words have a deeper meaning. It's not something that you ordinary people can understand." Jing Jiu said, "The destiny is the same. How can there be two? If your teacher's words have a deeper meaning, can I suspect that he intends to stir up a civil war in the royal palace?" Hearing this, the child didn't know what to say. He didn't know what his teacher was thinking, and he didn't dare respond. He grunted and ignored Jing Jiu, turning to look at the young girl sensei. Seeing the expression on the child's face, sensei knew what he was going to say. Feeling disappointed, she didn't want to leave like this. She raised her thin eyebrows, ready to make a fuss. The child said, "My teacher said that your mother's marriage depends on when the great grandmaster is tired of the human world." Hearing this, sensei's eyes brightened, asking when. The so-called tired of the human world was only in autumn. Sensei didn't like her grandmother, and she didn't expect her to die early. What she really wanted to know was something else. The child said, "At least 10 years later." The young girl thought that she would be an adult in 10 years. Even if her mother remarried at that time, she would be able to keep an eye on or stop it. Now that her question had been answered, she beamed with joy. She said a few words to Zhao Liu, arranged a time to meet the day after tomorrow, and then left the plum forest with the woman. Only Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu were left in the plum forest. The boy stopped talking and gestured to Zhao Liu to go ahead. Zhao Liu didn't look at Jing Jiu this time and went straight into the nunnery. Time flowed slowly, and the light in the sky changed between the branches. Jing Jiu stood in front of the nunnery in silence, not thinking about anything. After some time, the boy walked out of the nunnery and stood in front of him. Jing Jiu glanced at him but didn't say anything. The boy understood his meaning and said, "Your companion has already left the nunnery and is waiting over there." Jing Jiu walked out. The boy was stunned. After a while, he came to his senses and hurriedly shouted, "Wait." Jing Jiu stopped. The boy caught up with him and said discontentedly, "You're very lucky. There's still a place left for you today." He didn't understand why the teacher wasn't angry at the young cultivator's rudeness and even wanted to meet him. It should be noted that the teacher rarely paid attention to the state dukes of the imperial court. What surprised the boy even more was that Jing Jiu didn't turn around after hearing his words. Instead, he started walking toward the outside of the plum garden. "Hey, what are you doing?" The boy was both surprised and puzzled. He thought it was quite absurd and kept shouting after him. Jing Jiu didn't pay any attention to him. He walked to the lakeside in a few steps and prepared to pass through the pavilion covered with dozens of green leaves. Right at this moment, an aged and low voice resounded by his ear. "You really don't want to know the whereabouts of Jingyang?" Jing Jiu halted his steps, remaining silent while looking at the green leaves falling from the pavilion due to the wind. He knew that nobody could hear this voice except for himself. That person's spiritual awareness was so powerful that even those elders in the breaking sea state of the Aoyama sect couldn't compare to him. But it wasn't enough to make him stop. What made him stop was this question. The whole world thought the immortal Jingyang had ascended, but only a few people knew it wasn't true. For example, Zhao Liu, several important figures in the Aoyama sect, and of course himself. If there were other people who knew Jingyang had failed to ascend, they must have something to do with this matter. Those people could be the masterminds or accomplices. Anyway, They were the people he had been looking for. Of course, the owner of this voice might have heard something from somewhere and used this topic to play tricks. Or it could be that this person wanted to provoke him with this question. No matter which one it was, Jingjiu knew it was time to meet the other party. Walking into the old nunnery, he saw a shabby room with simple decorations. A flower pot was placed in front of the window, and a straw curtain was placed in the middle of the room. As Jingjiu stepped into the room, the straw curtain rose without any wind and tied itself to a pillar. The scene was quite magical, but he didn't even glance at it. When the straw curtain was lifted, the fragrance came first and then the scene. The light mist like smoke left the incense and dissipated into the air. A man was sitting behind the table. He had white hair, a face full of wrinkles, and his eyes were sunken. It was unknown how many years he had been blind, but he gave off an unfathomable and indescribable aura. Besides the incense burner, there were paper and an inkstone on the table. The ink in the inkstone reflected the sunlight. It seemed that there was no difference between black and white in the bright and gloomy environment. The old man was writing something with a snow hair pen in his hand. The snow hair pen was made of the fine hair in the oracle of a big demon of the Snowy Kingdom. It was extremely rare, especially in recent years when the war with the Snowy Kingdom had subsided. But such a rare pen in the old man's hand looked like the most common bunny hair, because the old man's expression was very natural, as if he didn't care. Maybe it was because he was blind and couldn't see the white and flawless brush hair. But it was more likely that he had seen through heaven and earth, let alone a pen. Jingjiu walked to the front of the table and looked at it. The ink in the inkstone couldn't be seen clearly, but it was absorbed by the snow hair and then fell on the paper, so he could see it clearly. That was mature ink. Mature ink was the ink that had been left for a night. The water and ink gradually separated and was written on the paper with the tip of the pen. It had a different beauty. Outside the ink, there were some traces of water, like a paper umbrella in the rain, or a girl with water drops on her temples. It was beautiful, but the ink was interdependent, so it was hard to distinguish black and white. Jingjiu was used to seeing Zhao Liu's eyes, so he didn't like it. Although he didn't like it, the writing was indeed excellent. "The writing is good," he said. If it was an ordinary person, he would have exclaimed a few words in addition to praising it. For example, "Your eyes can't see anything, but how can you write so well?" Then the old man could answer, "I'm Tian Jingren of the Institute of White Deer, and I have the unique skills in the heavenly cave, and I can see everything in my heart." But Jingjiu didn't say so there was no follow-up. As a result, the quietness in the nunnery was a bit awkward. He didn't do it on purpose, he just didn't care. In the medical house of the curtain rollers, he had said that Tian Jingren was good at bluffing. He knew that his opponent must have some abilities. Yet, no matter how capable he was, even if he had guided Jian Shalai to become the godly swordsman of the generation, even if he was recognized as the one who was the closest to the heavenly law, Jingjiu was still uninterested and unconcerned. The old man lowered his head, looking like a peak covered with white snow. It was very quiet in the nunnery. After a long while, the old man finally spoke. He asked Jingjiu a question. Chapter 133. Jingjiu glanced at the old man. This old man was none other than Tian Jingren. He was considered the master of destiny closest to the heavenly way. Yet, Jingjiu wasn't interested in him, even though he mentioned Jingyang. It wasn't until he heard this that Jingjiu looked him in the eye for the first time. Regardless of whether he guessed it or pretended to be mysterious, the old man was right. Jingjiu indeed didn't care about the human world. This was not a secret, but he didn't have the need or the opportunity to announce it to the whole human world. Lu Shui and Zhao Liu should have some feelings about it, but they couldn't confirm it because their relationship with Jingjiu was different. Jingjiu was surprised that Tian Jingren pointed it out, but he didn't continue the conversation, but asked, "I heard that each person can ask 3 questions." Tian Jingren stopped writing on the paper, saying, "That's right. Any question is fine." He didn't raise his head to look at Jingjiu as he spoke. This didn't mean he was impolite, because the whole land knew that he couldn't see anything with his eyes. Jing Jiao stared at his forehead, as if he wanted to find something from the wrinkles. Tian Jingren was waiting for something. The whole of Zhaoga City knew he was here, but they didn't know he lived in the old plum garden. Those who were able to find out his whereabouts and come here stealthily were definitely not ordinary people. For example, Lo Huainan, the young man in embroidered clothing, Zhao Leu, and Jing Jiao. As the most famous master of destiny in Chao Tian, Tian Jingren's words and actions could influence a person or even a sect. Those who had the opportunity to ask him for advice would choose the 3 questions carefully. Those who came to the plum garden that day had questions related to the destiny or the fortune of the land. What about Jing Jiao? Tian Jingren wanted to know what question this outstanding swordsman of a young generation of the Aoyama sect, this young man with countless secrets, would ask him today. In this way, he would be able to find out what Jing Jiao's secret was. Jing Jiao didn't even think about it before he voiced out his question. I want to know the content of their questions. The gentle breeze carried an extremely faint fragrance of flowers. It seeped in through the window and was quickly swallowed up by the incense, just like the time swallowed up by the spring sunshine. The silence in the nunnery originated from Tian Jingren's silence. The silence was not because the question was difficult to answer, but because it was unexpected. Tian Jingren needed to figure out the real intention of Jing Jiao's question. For a person like Lo Huainan to know his problem, she might be able to get close to his secret. This was, of course, a very important thing. The problem was that no one would use such an important opportunity to find out other people's secrets. Until now, Tian Jingren still thought that Jing Jiao was just playing hard to get when he wanted to leave. He did not believe that anyone would not cherish the opportunity to be evaluated by him. After an unknown period of time, Tian Jingren slowly placed a brush pen on the inkstone and said a few words. Knowing other people's secrets will naturally bring you a lot of benefits. But is there anything more important than knowing yourself and grasping the future? The separated ink in the inkstone was stirred back together by the tip of the brush, and the black and white could no longer be distinguished. It's such a failure to ask others about your own things. Jing Jiao said, I've failed before, and I don't like that feeling. Tian Jingren confirmed that he really did not care about this opportunity. Another long period of silence. Tian Jingren said slowly, Lo Huainan's problem is the same as yours. It's also a little strange. The window was open, and the fragrance in the room was still strong. A line of characters had just been written on the paper, and the ink and water were separating. Lo Huainan stood in front of the desk with a respectful attitude. She praised it several times, and when she got a response, she praised it again, as if she had never used the ink. As for why Tian Jingren could write such a good calligraphy without seeing things, like Jing Jiao, he did not ask. What he asked was, Senior, you have seen countless people in your life. What on earth are you looking at? Tian Jingren said, I'm looking at the past and the future. Lo Huainan kept silent for a long time and asked again, I also want to ask about the weather in the snow country. Tian Jingren closed his eyes, and no one knew whether he was calculating or hesitating whether he could reveal the secrets of heaven. The snow country has been very cold these years, and it will be cold for a long time. As long as the hot pot has been popular in the nether capital? Yes, at least more than 100 years. Hearing this answer, Lo Huainan showed a sincere smile on his face and said, Then don't worry about it. Thank you, Senior. Lo Huainan didn't ask him, either, because what he cared about was the human tribe. The first question didn't count. He got the answers he wanted with the last 2 questions very cleverly. The weather in the snow country and the hot pot in the nether capital would continue for another 100 years, so the human tribe didn't need to worry about it for the time being. Lo Huainan's question was not out of Jing Jiao's expectation. What about Zhao Leu? Tian Jingren said. She stood in front of me, hesitating for a long time. Eventually, she didn't ask anything. Jing Jiao seemed to be thinking about something. Tian Jingren said, Next, you have 2 more questions. Since you didn't ask, I won't ask either. Jing Jiao said, and you and I both know that you let me in not because you want me to ask you questions, but because you want to ask me questions. Tian Jingren slowly straightened his body and looked out of the window. It was unclear where he was looking at, or what he could see since he was blind. Jing Jiu said, "Is it Jian Shalai, the emperor, or someone from the Aoyama sect?" Tian Jingren said, "I'm indeed asked by someone, but I won't tell you who it is, because you gave up the last two questions." Jing Jiu said, "Then why do you think I will answer you?" Tian Jingren suddenly brought up something else. "If my feeling is right, you didn't disguise yourself, and you were a young man about 20 years old." Jing Jiu said, "That's right." Tian Jingren said lightly, "In that case, in front of an old man like me, what's the problem between you and a naked baby?" He didn't finish his words, but his meaning was clear. His eyes couldn't see anything, but he could see through all disguises, even the mysteries of heaven, with only a glance. Because he was Tian Jingren, Jing Jiu asked, "Are you sure you want to see me?" Tian Jingren said, "Yes. Well, do you dare not?" Jing Jiu looked at him and asked, "Can you afford it?" Tian Jingren said, "I even dare to peep at the way of heaven, not to mention a young man." After saying that, he raised his head and looked at Jing Jiu. Jing Jiu didn't avoid his gaze, but looked back at him in silence. As he raised his head, the wrinkles on the old man's forehead became deeper. His eyes had indeed been blinded a long time ago. Only his white eyeballs were left, with no pupils. He looked like a perfectly round jade ball buried in a tomb. His eyes were extremely weird, as if they had some magic power that could absorb all the light, including the gaze. Jing Jiu's eyes gradually became indifferent, and then no longer changed, like a green leaf falling on a swamp. It could no longer dance with the wind, and was about to sink into the swamp. Time in the nunnery slowed down and then stopped. Chapter 134. The stillness of time was usually reflected in the space. For instance, the smoke rising from the incense sticks and the flower petals blown into the air by the wind blowing in through the window were all frozen in the air. It was a marvelous scene. This could be seen. Next, it could be sensed. For instance, the sound would disappear, and an environment of absolute quietness would appear. In such an absolute quietness, the people involved wouldn't and couldn't have any reaction, but the observers who were paying attention to the environment would have a different feeling. The child stood outside the old nunnery. He couldn't see the marvelous scene in the quiet room, but he could hear. Nothing could be heard inside. This eerie feeling made him nervous. Then he remembered that he had a similar experience when he was young, and his face turned pale. He was an orphan sent to the White Deer Institute and had been serving Tian Jingren since he was a child. A few years ago, he had seen Tian Jingren entertain a distinguished guest. That distinguished guest was the sect master of the No Mercy sect. According to the story, Tian Jingren didn't want to see the orthodox cultivation sects kill each other, so he intended to mediate the dispute between the No Mercy sect and the Western Sea Sword School. The two sides had exchanged letters a few times in advance, and the Western Sea Sword School had withdrawn their attacks to show their sincerity. The child remembered clearly that the White Deer Institute was as quiet as it was today that day. No sound could be heard, not even the slightest sound of wind. What left the deepest impression on him was that the grasshopper he had raised in the parlor hadn't made a single sound from beginning to end. It was as quiet as death. Later, the sect master of the No Mercy sect left the White Deer Institute. It was said that he refused Tian Jingren's advice and insisted on fighting against the Western Sea Sword School. Later, the teacher fell seriously ill. As a result, the enrollment of the White Deer Institute was postponed for 2 months. The sect master of the No Mercy sect was severely wounded in the duel with the godly swordsman. If the sect master of the Aoyama sect hadn't intervened in person, he would have died on the spot. Since then, the No Mercy sect had been in a disadvantageous position in the competition between the two sects and had no chance to turn the tables. Nobody associated the conversation at the White Deer Institute with what would happen in the future. Most of them thought that the reason Tian Jingren was seriously ill was that he had consumed too much of his energy in trying to persuade the no-mercy sect master with a method of divination. The boy had been outside the door at that time. He had vaguely guessed that the truth of the matter was not so simple, but of course he would not reveal it to others. Today, he felt that absolute silence again. Could it be that the teacher wanted to do something? However, wasn't Jingjiu just a junior disciple of Aoyama's sect? Space stood still. The sound faded away. All of this was just the surface. In other words, these were all illusions that could be created by a powerful divine sense. True stopping of time would inevitably cause all movements, including the internal movements of objects, to stop. For example, thinking. At that time, Jingjiu was thinking about something. When his sight fell on Tian Jingren's white eyeball, his thinking speed became slower and slower. Although the speed of his thinking wouldn't really stop if he continued like this, the mismatch between the speed of his thinking and the real flow of time would cause him to miss a lot of things that were happening. This was the so-called forgetting. Jingjiu would not let such a thing happen. The moment his thinking speed slowed down, he realized what had happened. Normally, thinking shouldn't be able to sense the changes of thinking itself. He could sense it because he was special in the first place, and also because his calculation ability was so strong that he was extremely sensitive to the slightest changes in the speed of calculation. Realizing what was happening was a thought. As a result, he woke up. He discovered that a fragment of divine sense had entered his body without him noticing. That fragment of divine sense was very faint, but also very powerful. Only a mental energy as powerful as the ocean could compress a fragment of divine sense into such a tiny fragment and send it noiselessly into someone else's body, using his sight as a bridge. This fragment of divine sense didn't carry any energy, as if it were the purest piece of jade, exceptionally clean. Even a cultivation practitioner who meditated and meditated every day wouldn't be able to detect it. This fragment of divine sense traveled quietly along his meridians and had already arrived at his sea of consciousness, where it quietly landed on the Tao tree. Jingjiu sensed a hint of caution. He sensed great danger. This was the most dangerous situation he had faced since he stepped into the Path River again. It was even far more dangerous than the moment when Jingyang's fake abode of a mortal's cave was opened and when the master of Shilai Peak, Fong Jingtian, discovered him. This fragment of divine sense didn't seem to be malicious, but it could change at any time. It could easily pollute the Tao tree and damage the sword pill. It could quietly hinder his cultivation when he didn't notice it at all. It could even shake his Taoist heart and affect his state at the most critical moment of the decisive battle, but it still didn't let him discover it. What made Jingjiu most vigilant was that if this fragment of divine sense stayed in his body, it was likely to discover his secret. No wonder he was Tian Jingren. His means were really unpredictable. If he used this method to deal with others, even the elders of the Aoyama sect, Zhongzhou school, and even the eminent monks of the Guocheng temple might fall for it, let alone Lo Huainan and Zhao Liu. However, even for Tian Jingren, this method would inevitably consume a lot of divine sense and cost him a lot, so he wouldn't use it easily. Jingjiu was convinced again that Tian Jingren must have been entrusted by someone to see him. The question was, who was that person? Fong Jingtian, Jian Shilai, or his most vigilant big brother? If it were before, Jingjiu would have asked this question directly or left the fragment of divine sense in his body, pretending not to know anything. But now he couldn't. In a very short period of time, he had made 3 deductions and confirmed that it was too dangerous to do so. His current cultivation state was still too low, so he couldn't leave such a great danger in his body. He made up his mind. The sword will arose. Jingjiu focused his eyes slightly, a cold light flashing across his eyes. The sword pill in his body suddenly dispersed, turning into more than 300 sword wheels, hacking toward the fragment of the divine sense. Time resumed its normal speed. The space returned to normal. The white smoke generated by the incense dispersed. The petals rolled up by the wind fell on the window lattice, making a faint sound. In a place where the sound couldn't be heard, The sword wind whistled and the thunder boomed. In a place where the sound couldn't be seen, the more than 300 sword wheels shattered the fragment of the divine sense into snow-like bits. A shapeless thunder struck along with the divine sense, blasting those bits into nothingness. The wind was howling. His white hair was dancing in the wind. Tian Jingren's body trembled, his face pale, as if he was in great pain. As the shapeless thunder boomed, he couldn't hold on any longer, letting out a muffled groan, blood trickling down from the corners of his mouth. "Who the hell are you?" Tian Jingren stared at Jing Jiao with his blind eyes, his voice full of shock and doubt. "As I said, you can't bear the answer to this question." Jing Jiao picked up a stack of white paper from the table and walked toward the outside of the nunnery. As the door was opened, the sunlight fell on his face. Chapter 135. The wooden door was opened, and Jing Jiao walked out. Hearing the coughing coming from the room, the child was shocked. He got up and ran into the room. The coughing echoed in the quiet room. The words on the white paper on the table weren't rolled up yet, but they were covered with blood spots, looking like plum blossoms. Tian Jingren's face was pale, looking extremely painful. The child asked in a trembling voice, Teacher, what's going on?" Tian Jingren didn't pay attention to him. He stared in the direction where Jing Jiao had left, panting. His pupilless eyes looked like a dead fish. "What a bright silvery light. It's all silvery light. Who are you?" It was the first time the child saw his teacher show such a bewildered expression, asking fearfully, "Teacher, should we leave?" After a while, Tian Jingren had finally calmed down, shaking his head with difficulty. Since Jing Jiao had seen through his attack, the Aoyama sect might react to it. For some reason, he wasn't worried about this, but he was shocked at how Jing Jiao had sensed his attack and how he had seen through it. As Tian Jingren said, Jing Jiao had only cultivated for a short time, so there was a huge gap between their cultivation states. If Tian Jingren hadn't tried to implant a fragment of his spiritual awareness into Jing Jiao's body, he could have easily defeated Jing Jiao by using his cultivation state. However, he used his spiritual energy to deal with Jing Jiao, which was tantamount to asking for trouble or even seeking death. In all of Chaotian, Tian Jingren's spiritual energy was far superior to most swordsmen and could be said to be immeasurable, but he was still no match for Jing Jiao. Of course, Jing Jiao had to pay a price for it. As he left the old nunnery, he took a pile of white paper from the table. As he walked toward the outside of the plum forest, he used the paper to wipe his mouth. Soon, the paper was stained red with blood. He was wounded badly. Otherwise, he would have wielded his sword and killed Tian Jingren right there and then. He walked away so resolutely and seemingly at ease, but he needed to intimidate his opponent by doing so. Everyone, including Sensei, had already left. Only Zhao Liu was waiting outside the plum forest. Looking at Jing Jiao's pale face, Zhao Liu raised her eyebrows. Before she could speak, Jing Jiao asked a question. "What do you think of the relationship between Lo Huainan and that young man?" Zhao Liu was thinking about him. Hearing this question, she was a little surprised and said, "Lo Huainan is being a little rude on purpose." She had already vaguely guessed the identity of that young man in embroidered clothes. Lo Huainan was the strongest among the younger generation of cultivators, but he couldn't surpass that person. But in front of the nunnery, he didn't even glance at the young man in embroidered robes, nor did he speak. Jing Jiao put on his conical hat and ignited the stack of papers in his hand. Then he said, "They know each other, and their relationship should not be shallow." "Why?" Zhao Liu asked. "Because the Jing royal family has always been close to the Zhongzhou school. It's impossible that the principal disciple of the Zhongzhou school doesn't know the crown prince," Jing Jiao said, "so they are trying to avoid arousing suspicion." Staring into his eyes, Zhao Liu asked, "What happened?" The conical hat covered Jing Jiao's face, and the blood-stained paper was burned to ashes, but it couldn't escape her eyes. After a moment of silence, Jing Jiao said, "I didn't accept what Tian Jingren wanted to do." "Are you injured?" Zhao Leu turned her head around and glanced at the old nunnery in the plum forest. I'm fine, Jingjiu said. He didn't feel well either. What happened in the nunnery? She asked. Jingjiu said, I asked a question, and he asked a question. My question was simple, and his question was difficult. So we parted on bad terms. Thinking of his secrets, Zhao Leu vaguely guessed the truth, saying, I shouldn't have come here, and you wouldn't have met him. Me meeting him in the end has nothing to do with you or him. Jingjiu was telling the truth. He walked back to the old nunnery from the plum forest, seemingly because Tian Jinren mentioned Jingyang. But he knew it was just an excuse. The real reason he went to see Tian Jinren was out of curiosity. It was said that this Grand Master of the Institute of White Deer was the one closest to the way of heaven in the world. He had seen the way of heaven. He wanted to verify whether the way of heaven he and Tian Jinren saw was the same, so he could break some mental barriers. Unfortunately, Tian Jinren was still far away from the way of heaven, so he couldn't provide any proof for him. These things were hard to explain, and he didn't want to. Walking along the stone path to the exit of the old plum garden, he heard noises coming from the street not far away. That arrogant young man was still destroying the owner of the chess stall on the street. Jingjiu halted his steps and sat down on the stone steps. It was unclear whether it was because he was tired or because of his injury. Looking at the dense crowd on the street in the distance, he said, Lo Huainan went to the nunnery to ask questions. Why didn't he go? Zhao Lei knew he was talking about the young man playing chess. She also knew who the young man playing chess was. But she couldn't answer this question. Jingjiu said, because he is really smart, and he is proud enough. Zhao Lei said, I know he is proud, but what about being smart? Jingjiu said, because he didn't go to the nunnery to ask questions. Zhao Lei thought, isn't this the same thing again? She said, I feel that you're saying I'm stupid. Jingjiu said, you didn't ask questions, did you? The expression on Zhao Lei's face changed slightly, asking, how do you know? Because this is the question I asked Tian Jinren. Jingjiu said, I know you didn't ask, and I also know what Lo Huainan asked. Zhao Lei was very interested in Lo Huainan's question. Jingjiu told her about his question and Tian Jinren's answer, and then said, the so-called question is for the world to see, and the answer is actually not important. Who can tell what will happen 100 years later? The key is the content of the question and what kind of evaluation it will bring to the questioner. Zhao Lei roughly understood what he meant. If Lo Huainan's question was spread out, his image would be even more impressive, because what he cared about was not food and vegetables, or the warmth of spring, or the blooming of flowers, but the future and fate of the human race. If the young man in embroidered clothes had a chance to enter the nunnery, he wouldn't have asked the emperor how many years he had left, even though it was the question he cared about the most. The young man in embroidered clothes would have asked the perfect and perfect questions like Lo Huainan. Did the young man who played chess not enter the nunnery because he understood this and because he was proud and aloof? Zhao Lei only knew that it wasn't the reason why she didn't enter the nunnery. She really wanted to know the whereabouts of the immortal Jingyang, but she didn't dare to take the risk. Besides, she also wanted to know who on earth Jingjiu was. You should ask me this question directly. Jingjiu looked in her eyes and said, I am the person you want to. Zhao Lei raised her right hand to stop him. Chapter 136. The movement of Zhao Lei's hand was very forceful. Because she had been holding the sword for a long time, her fingers were covered with calluses. She swept through the air on the stone steps at a high speed, creating a whistling sound in the wind, like the fluttering flags on the battlefield, showing a resolute intent and even a determination to kill. What was more resolute and determined was the expression in her eyes. She could understand the meaning of Jingjiu's gaze and movement. It was the same the other way around. Jingjiu didn't continue speaking, but he didn't understand why she didn't want to hear it. He was well aware that his true identity was what Zhao Lei wanted to know the most. Though she had never mentioned it, she would occasionally mention the names of Lien Sanyue and others in their conversations. It might be a test, or it might be a natural outpouring of her inner thoughts. She came to see Tian Jingren today to ask him this question. Why didn't she ask him? Jing Jiao was going to tell her. Why didn't she want to hear it? I've had many conjectures about your identity. I've thought that you might be a devil man of the deviant sex, and I've had even more bizarre conjectures. Zhao Liu continued. But I didn't ask you today because I've figured out that I don't need the answer. Why? Asked Jing Jiao. Because I don't want to hear a bad answer, and I don't know what I should do if the answer is true. As she said this, Zhao Liu's expression was a bit shy. If the disciples of the Aoyama sect saw this, they would be shocked, speechless. This was something that shouldn't have happened to her. Jing Jiao understood how she felt, saying, I promise you that it won't be a bad answer. Zhao Liu was taken aback for a moment, but she didn't dare think too deeply about it. That's good, she said. Is that enough? Asked Jing Jiao. Zhao Liu said earnestly, It doesn't matter who you are. All I know is that you're someone important to me. It's like this, said Jing Jiao after some thought. Zhao Liu smiled while looking at him, the small flower on her temple quivering slightly in the wind. Jing Jiao reached out his hand and rubbed her head. Zhao Liu opened her eyes wide, the black and white of her eyes distinct, extremely lively, very attractive. Jing Jiao thought he would hear the mantra of the Aoyama sect again. Don't do this. Zhao Liu wasn't angry, but she felt a bit uneasy. She carefully removed his hand from the top of her head, but she didn't let go. She took him from the steps and led him to the street of the plum garden. In the past few years, when they traveled the world, they would occasionally hold hands when they needed to ride on their swords. But that was gripping, not pulling. Gripping was gripping the sword, pulling was implicating. Holding hands meant holding hands. Meant holding hands, not holding hands. It was mainly because Jing Jiao. That day, Jing Jiao and Song. Jiao, it was in close. The side of the street near the old plum garden had become empty. The chess stalls had already been removed, leaving only a few scraps of paper and a few overturned old stools. The street near the old plum garden was empty. The chess stalls were no longer indifferent, but weary. The young man stood in front of chess stall. His childish face was no longer as indifferent as before. Instead, it was filled with boredom. Playing chess with these chess stall owners was a very unbearable thing for him. That was understandable. Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu walked on the street. They didn't stop or look in that direction. Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu walked on the street without stopping, and they didn't even glance in that direction. Zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting weren't related to their lives. They didn't care about music, chess, calligraphy, or painting. Then they heard a few exclamations. Then they heard something. Mr. He of the Chunshi chess house had an ugly expression, especially when he saw the weary look on the young man's face. He had just played the game and suffered a crushing defeat. What frightened him even more was that he didn't understand how he lost. He couldn't even see the depth of his opponent's chess skills. He heard footsteps outside the crowd. He turned his head around and saw Mr. Second, who had the most connections in the chess house, walking in the front. He felt relieved immediately. The Chunshi chess house was quite famous in Zhaoga City, so they must have invited a formidable chess player. When he saw the old man in cotton cloth with a long beard fluttering in the wind, he gasped in surprise, wondering why they had invited this person. More and more people saw the old man. The crowd parted like the tide, discussing and guessing in a low voice. In the end, they couldn't hold it in any longer and screamed in surprise. Grand Scholar Guo, why is this old man here? The old man's name was Guo Qi, an important official of the imperial court and a grand scholar of the imperial library. He had a very high status. For the people on the street who made a living by playing chess, this old man had another identity that was even more famous. Grand Scholar Guo was a national chess player. He was even recognized as the #1 player in the imperial court. Next, it was then that the young man finished his game. He said this without lifting his head. Grand Scholar Guo walked to the front of the chess stall and said, "Please enlighten me." The young man lifted his head. He was a bit surprised to see Grand Scholar Guo, and his expression finally grew serious. He cupped his hands and said, "Sir, you are well informed. I can only say that I'm lucky today. Grand Scholar Gwa said with a smile, while stroking his long beard. The court meeting was cancelled because of the plum meeting. I went to the auspicious house to have dinner, and the owner of the Chunchi chess house came here in a hurry, asking for the assistant of my house. I was curious, so I asked him a few questions. Mystery now knew why Grand Scholar Gwa came here. The assistant of the Grand Scholar House had excellent chess skills, far better than the regular chess masters in Jiaoga City, but they were no match for the scholar himself. Yet, how could his chess house invite an important figure like Grand Scholar Gwa? As he was thinking of this, he heard the young man say, "It's not worth it." Grand Scholar Gwa said seriously, "Many people in Jiaoga City want to play a game with you, but you haven't accepted them. It's a rare opportunity today. How can I miss it?" Hearing the conversation, there was an uproar in the crowd, wondering who this young man was. He was different from the crowd at the stalls on the street. He had guessed the identity of this young man, and his expression changed abruptly. His clothes were soaked in cold sweat, thinking that he had played a game of chess with this young man. Wasn't he courting death? But in the next moment, he felt happy again. It was natural to lose to this young man, and it was not a shameful thing. More importantly, how many people had the opportunity to play chess with this young man? It was such a glorious thing. But I don't understand why you come here to play chess. Looking at the shabby environment and the ordinary chess equipment, Grand Scholar Gwa furrowed his brows in bewilderment. The young man said, "I don't want these people to play chess, especially here." Grand Scholar Gwa fixed his gaze on the plum forest in the distance. He was taken aback for a moment, and then he understood what he meant. The old plum garden had been gradually forgotten by the people, but it had witnessed the most important events in the history of the human race and those people. Such a place shouldn't be disturbed by the noises of those people fighting over chess pieces and those swindlers. It's indeed a bit ugly. Grand Scholar Gwa looked around and said, "If you defeat me, I'll clear this place." As a Grand Scholar of the Imperial Library, he had the ability to do so. Yet, the young man didn't accept it, saying, "You can't defeat me." As for clearing the place, these stall owners won't be convinced, and many people in Jiaoga City won't be convinced. The crowd screamed again, thinking that this person was extremely arrogant. Yet, Grand Scholar Gwa understood what he meant. "Please," he said solemnly. The young man said, "Please wait a moment. I have something to do first." "Please," said Grand Scholar Gwa. After saying this, his gaze fell on a relatively clean stool. The caretaker of the Grand Scholar Manor came forward hastily to wipe it clean and serve tea. Grand Scholar Gwa sat down, wondering what the young man was going to do. The young man looked at the street. A young man and a young woman wearing conical hats passed by. The young man asked, "Do you want to try it?" The sunlight shone on the conical hats, making them glow faintly. The two of them halted their steps, saying nothing. The young man said, "I meant that you should try to see if you can understand my chess moves." Chapter 137. Anyone who heard the first sentence would think that this young man was challenging Jingjio to a duel. It wasn't until they heard the second sentence that they realized what he really meant. What else could it be if it wasn't an intentional humiliation? Earlier in the plum garden, when Lo Huainan said she would break Jingjio's sword, Zhao Liu had a murderous intent toward him. According to the normal development of the story, she was furious at the moment, raising her sword-like inky eyebrows, a cold sword light flashing in her eyes. After uttering the famous saying of the Aoyama sect, she wielded her sword to hack at the young man behind the table. However, she had cultivated for a short period of time, and her cultivation state wasn't as high as her opponent's, so she was in danger. Jingjio had no choice but to use his trump card and strike in person, cutting the young man in half in front of Grand Scholar. The street was covered in blood. It was a horrible scene. The sect of the young man couldn't accept such a thing, so the plum meeting was halted immediately. The two most powerful orthodox sects in Chaotian had engaged in an all-out war. The swordsmen in the broken sea state could overturn the rivers and seas, and the swordsmen in the heavenly arrival state could destroy heaven and earth. Both sides suffered great casualties. The Western Sea Sword School took advantage of the situation to rise up. The swordsmen of the deviant sects, such as Bulow Lin and the mysterious dark sect, colluded with the devil men of the underworld to attack the alliance of the orthodox sections. Blood was everywhere, and the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom suddenly attacked the south. The Broadsword King couldn't handle the situation on his own, so he died in the battle. The northern army was slaughtered, and Zhaoga City was breached. Fortunately, Jing Jiao stopped this part of history before it could appear in this time and space. In fact, he had done something similar before, but few people in Chaotian knew about it. Zhao Liu sensed his intention through the strength of her hand. For the cultivation practitioners, emotions were a meaningless and unnecessary thing. It was better to kill him with a swing of the sword or defeat him with a single blow. If he couldn't do it, there was no need to be angry. Jing Jiao let go of Zhao Liu's hand and walked to the chess stall under the peculiar gazes. Zhao Liu felt surprised, wondering why he went there if he didn't care about it. If she really didn't like him, even if she didn't slash at him, shouldn't she have just left? Why did she listen to him? Glancing at Jing Jiao once, Grand Scholar Guo felt strange about the relationship between Jing Jiao and that young man, asking, "You play Go?" Jing Jiao said, roughly. The Grand Scholar Guo stopped thinking about this matter because he needed to concentrate on it. He had never played against a young man before, but he had seen many of his playing records. He firmly believed that the other party was the most talented person in hundreds of years. He was a national player in the chess world and was even known as the strongest player in the imperial court. Yet, he was not confident that he could defeat his opponent. Against such a person, he had to focus all of his attention and isolate himself from all distractions in order to have a chance. The young man stopped talking to Jing Jiao and closed his eyes to rest. He didn't think he would lose, but Grand Scholar Guo was different from those stall owners. The street was quiet and the atmosphere was tense. Suddenly, the sound of carriages and horses could be heard from outside the crowd. There was even the sound of flying swords tearing through the air. Then, the sound of hurried footsteps and conversation came from the street. Where? Did you hear it right? Did Scholar Guo really say that? Is it really him? Why would that person come to such a place? Dozens of people of different ages and wearing different clothes came to the scene. Some of them looked dignified, wearing eye-catching official robes. Some of them looked elegant, wearing long robes. Some of them were merchants, and some of them were cultivation practitioners riding on their swords. These people knew each other. They were all highly achieved chess players in Zhaoga City, and some of them were even national players. The stall owners recognized some of them, and they guessed the identities of the others. They were shocked speechless and made way for them hastily. Seeing Grand Scholar Guo and that young man sitting across from each other at the table, those highly achieved chess players realized that the rumor was true. They were excited, but they shut their mouths hastily, not daring to make any sound in case they disturbed the two of them. However, they couldn't help but feel puzzled when they saw the young man with the conical hat standing by the table, wondering who this person was. The young man had his eyes closed, and it seemed that he was not affected by the situation. A minute later, Grand Scholar Guo opened his eyes slowly, saying, "Let's begin." His eyes were as deep as a well, and they were truly peaceful. The young man opened his eyes and said, "Please." With a word of invitation, he actually left black to his opponent without any other explanation. Those highly achieved chess players who came here to watch the game were stunned speechless, thinking that this young man was indeed as arrogant and confident as rumored. Grand Scholar Guo was still calm. He didn't show any anger after being looked down upon, nor did he show any joy after taking advantage of his opponent. He picked up a Go piece and put it on the Go board gently. The young man picked up a Go piece and put it on another spot on the Go board. Many people noticed the difference in some details. Grand Scholar Guo used his middle and index fingers to pick up the Go piece, and he put it down softly. His movement was very elegant, like a willow branch touching the water, making no sound. The young man caught the Go piece with 3 fingers and put it down casually, his movement a bit ugly. His Go piece collided with the Go board, making a pa sound. It didn't have any lethal intent, but was rather ordinary. The go piece landed on a very ordinary spot, and nothing special could be seen from it. The so-called special was the good that could be seen. The good was the good that could be predicted. If one couldn't see the good of the first move, it was because there were too many empty spots on the go board, and there was still a lot of room for improvement, so one couldn't predict the next move. But if the next dozen or so moves were still in the same style, ordinary and as plain as water, without any special move, it meant that the spectators had no way to predict the next move. It might be because the chess players were more skilled than the spectators, but it was mostly because everyone had a different way of thinking. Those highly achieved chess players had stopped thinking about the intention of the young man's every move, thinking that they could predict the next move when the situation became more obvious. Jing Jiu didn't do so. Looking at the Go board, he calculated silently. His way of playing Go was different from the others. He was used to calculating from the first move until the end of the game. This method was extreme and demanding, but it was suitable for Jing Jiu, who hadn't studied Go seriously. He, of course, knew that there was a small problem with this method, but he hadn't had the chance to experience it before. It wasn't until today that he finally experienced it. The small problem was that it was tiring to play Go like this. It was quiet. Only the sound of the Go pieces landing on the Go board could be heard. More and more people came after hearing the news. They were all famous people in Xiaoga City, and even a few state dukes came in person. The game outside the Old Plum Garden that day was destined to be a famous game recorded in the history of Go. The #1 national chess player of the imperial court against a young chess master. Who would win? The Go pieces landed. Time flew by. The sunlight moved on. Jing Jiu stood by the Go board. Some gazes fell on him once in a while and then moved away. Wearing the conical hat, he was merely the background of the game, so he was ignored. Except for that young man, nobody knew that he was playing Go at the moment. He was playing this game. It was inevitable that he would feel tired after standing for a long time. Chapter 138. This movement of Jing Jiu drew the attention of others again. People started to guess his identity again. Standing by the Go table, they could see the situation on the Go board clearly, and they could even see the wrinkles on Grand Scholar's face and the way that young man raised his thin eyebrows. The highly achieved chess players watching the game could only stand a bit further away. They envied his position and wished they could take his place. It would be great if they could even stand by his side and pour tea for him. Unexpectedly, he sat down on the Go table. What kind of behavior was this? Wait a moment, where did he get that chair from? The game had passed the opening stage, and it was now the middle stage. The situation had finally become clearer. After some thought, Grand Scholar will put down a Go piece, feeling pretty good. He was finally in the mood to relax a bit. Then he noticed Jing Jiu. Glancing at the bamboo chair under Jing Jiu, he asked with a smile, "Would you like another cup of tea?" "What kind of tea?" asked Jing Jiu. Grand Scholar was said, "The Maojian tea sent from Xinyang." Jing Jiu didn't know much about the tea ceremony, and he seldom drank tea, but he knew the name. "I'll have a cup then," he said. The caretaker of the Grand Scholar Manor had been waiting by the side. It didn't take long for him to bring 3 cups of new tea over. Jing Jiu lifted the lid of the tea, and a faint fragrance came out along with the steam. It smelled good. It was then that the young man responded by putting down a Go piece in the upper right corner of the Go board. Grand Scholar's hand holding the teacup stiffened slightly, and he narrowed his eyes, his expression growing grave, not as relaxed as before. Thud, thud. It was not the sound of time elapsing, but the sound of the Go pieces landing on the Go board. The sunlight continued to move. The twilight was getting darker, and the visibility was getting blurry. Someone had prepared the lanterns earlier, and the long street was as bright as daytime. The game was in the middle stage, and more Go pieces were on the Go board. The situation was very complicated, but it was easier for those highly achieved chess players to see the game clearly. They were naturally on Grand Scholar's side, thinking about how to resolve the current situation. Some of them furrowed their brows. Some of them bit their fingers reflexively. Some of them kept on fanning themselves in the chilly spring night, and some of them shook their heads dejectedly. The similarity was that they all had a grave expression on their faces, just like Grand Scholar, who was contemplating. Zhao Liu stood on the opposite side of the street and looked around the chess stall in confusion. Then, her gaze fell on Jing Jiu again. Only she noticed that Jing Jiu's right hand was moving slightly under the bamboo chair. It reminded her of many days and nights in Aoyama. During those days and nights, Jing Jiu just leaned against the bamboo chair, holding a grain of sand between his fingers, thinking about where to put it on the porcelain plate. Could he think of an answer today? I lost. Grand Scholar's long examination didn't yield any result. He sighed and admitted the result. His voice was a little tired, but it was more like he was relieved from a heavy burden. There was a burst of exclamations on the street, and then it quickly became abnormally quiet. Everyone's gaze shifted from the chessboard to the young man's face. Their eyes were filled with admiration and even awe. The black and white go pieces were scattered on the chessboard. They were two different colors, which had a unique sense of beauty. They seemed to be two different existences, but they depended on each other and then destroyed each other. The black go pieces were very heavy, like a coal mountain that was impossible to step over. The white go pieces were not on the ground. They were like the stars in the night sky, scattered in all directions. A few stars were in the east, and a dozen or so were in the west. It seemed random, but there was a rule among them. The rule was very mysterious, like the principle of heaven and earth. It was hard to understand, so how could it be broken? Grand Scholar stood up and looked down at the chessboard for a long time, and then he sighed again. Human strength is indeed no match for nature. I'm too greedy. The young man said, Master, you've cultivated too late, and your energy is limited. It's hard for you to suffer a loss. Grand Scholar smiled bitterly, feeling a bit sad. As a national chess player, how could he not understand this principle? But he was still a bit unwilling to accept it. He straightened up and turned around to leave. His body swayed, and he almost fell down. Fortunately, the housekeeper of the Grand Scholar Manor was by his side and helped him up. By now, even those chess stall owners who had been driven to a distant place knew who this young man was. He could defeat the #1 chess player of the imperial court, Grand Scholar, in the middle game. There was only one person in the world who could do so, Tong Yin of Zhongzhou. Tong Yin was a young disciple of Zhongzhou school, a talented genius. More importantly, he was undoubtedly the #1 chess player in the world. Most of his chess games were played on the Cloud Dream Mountain with his colleagues. He seldom played chess except for the first 3 plum meetings, and he almost didn't communicate with the highly achieved chess players in Jiaoga City and other places. Yet, nobody dared question his reputation. It was because people had seen his chess playing records. The unique feature of chess playing was that one could accurately judge a player's level through the chess playing records, especially someone like Tong Yin. His chess-playing records were enough to make the vast majority of chess players feel hopeless. The question was, why did an invincible player like him come to the alley of Jiaoga City to make trouble for the chess stall owners? Tong Yin didn't answer this question. He turned his head to the side of the table, asking, Have you understood it? Jing Jiu. Grand Scholar, who was about to leave, halted his steps and turned around to look at the bamboo chair, feeling surprised. Jing Jiu took off his conical hat. The lanterns hanging by the street illuminated his face. It was an indescribably beautiful face. There was an uproar in the crowd. Many uncontrollable screams and praises broke out. The lights were waning. It should only be in the sky. Was this the rumored Jing Jiu? Did Tong Yin wait for him here today? Many people recalled a rumor. During the Four Seas banquet and the sword trial of Aoyama last year, Jing Jiu had said that he would participate in the plum meeting and defeat Tong Yin in chess playing. Did Tong Yin not come to make trouble for these chess stalls, but for him? Did he play this game for him to see? Was he trying to intimidate him? Soon, the people overruled their own thoughts. Tong Yin was aloof, proud, and arrogant. How could he do such a thing just for a challenger? Even though Jing Jiu had won first place in the chess tournament at the Four Seas banquet last year, he wasn't worthy of his attention. Many important figures watching the game of chess that day had received the booklet written by the curtain rollers for the plum meeting. They remembered clearly that Tong Yin ranked first in the chess tournament, and Jingjiu had a very good ranking, not even in the top 10. What was going on today? What was the deeper meaning of Tong Yin's question? Go was originally the simplest game. It was not difficult to place the black and white Go pieces on the board one by one. Even a child needed only one day to master the basic rules. It was because it was simple that it was the most difficult game. What did it mean to understand it? Chapter 139. It was a difficult question to answer. The others couldn't even understand it. Tong Yin knew that Jingjiu would understand. Knowing that Jingjiu was going to challenge him at the plum meeting, he wanted to read the chess records of the Four Seas banquet. He wouldn't give this kind of attention to other challengers, even to those famous national chess players. He paid more attention to Jingjiu because he was a disciple of the Aoyama sect. The disciples of the Aoyama sect didn't like zither, chess, calligraphy, or painting, which was quite different from the Zhongzhou school. However, those who dabbled in zither would show amazing talent, such as the current peak master of Qingrong, Nen Wang. The more important reason was that Jingjiu was the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang. After reading the chess records of the Four Seas banquet, Tong Yin didn't pay much attention to Jingjiu. Instead, he felt displeased. It was the same as Xiang Wanshu's feeling. They had never seen anyone who played chess so badly. If there were different schools of chess playing, then there had always been two schools since the ancient times. Those who played chess like Jingjiu were classified as the school of hard fighting, calculating all kinds of gains and losses. Tong Yin couldn't accept such a method of playing chess that lacked beauty and relied on brute force to win. How could the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang behave like this? Tong Yin asked Jingjiu if he could understand her chess playing, in order to tell him that it wasn't the way to play chess. Could you predict every move I would make? Don't tell me you can predict my next move every time. Jingjiu didn't answer Tong Yin's question. This seemed to prove Tong Yin's idea. I just said that these people don't deserve to play chess here. And so do you. Tong Yin stood up and said while looking at him, because you're not playing chess, but planning. As he said this, he looked down at Jingjiu, his eyebrows even lighter, and his arrogant look even more unbearable. Moreover, what he said was extremely mean. The crowd was restless. In chess, Tong Yin was qualified to comment on anyone. A moment ago, he had easily defeated the number 1 Grand Scholar Gua in the middle game. However, his evaluation of Jingjiu was too harsh. After all, Jingjiu was a disciple of Aoyama. Some time ago, when you broke Nanshan's sword, you used calculation, just like your chess style. Tong Yin said, "Today I want to tell you that it is difficult to achieve the great way by scheming." Zhao Liu listened on the other side of the street and finally understood why this person spoke so rudely. It turned out that the reason was the same as what Lo Huainan had said in the plum garden. Guan Nanshan traveled all year round and made friends with countless heroes. Even the geniuses of Zhongzhou school wanted to stand up for him. The relationship between Zhongzhou school and Aoyama sect was not close. It had nothing to do with his identity as the principal disciple of Aoyama sect. It was because of his outstanding temperament and way of doing things. Calculating is many times more complicated than playing chess. Jingjiu stood up and said to Tong Yin, "I think playing chess is no different from playing mahjong. They are both games, but it requires some calculation." There was an uproar. Many people were angry when they heard this, thinking how could these two games be compared? Even those stall owners who had been pushed to the far side were not convinced, thinking how could chess be compared to mahjong, which was a game of gambling. Though they could also make money by playing the remaining games, they were doing it for the sake of elegance. It couldn't even be counted as cheating. Tong Yin sneered. "You think you can calculate all the possible changes by relying on your calculation? Don't you understand that the path is boundless?" Jingjiu said, "The universe is boundless, so it is impossible to calculate all the possible changes. But there are only 38 lines and 361 points on the chessboard. Why can't you calculate all the possible changes?" Tong Yin said, "You can't even calculate my next move, let alone calculate all the possible changes. Jing Jiu said, "Nobody can calculate every move of his opponent. It's because his opponent doesn't even know it himself." Tong Yin didn't agree with this statement. Take this chess game as an example. No matter where Grand Scholar Guo would place his move, Jing Jiu had already prepared a few excellent solutions. How could he not know what his next move would be? Jing Jiu tapped the chessboard with his fingertip, and then picked up a black go piece and put on a spot on the chessboard. "You have your own path, and I have mine. Let's go our separate ways. If you want to prove me wrong, you should defeat me at the plum meeting first." Having said that, Jing Jiu put away the bamboo chair, turned around, and walked to the other side of the street, leaving together with Zhao Liu. Tong Yin pulled back her gaze and looked at the chessboard. Many onlookers had also fixed their gazes on the chessboard. Then the discussions and laughter broke out in the square. The place where the black go piece was placed had blocked a large area of his own go pieces. Isn't this a joke? As the winner of the chess tournament at the Four Seas banquet, nobody thought that Jing Jiu didn't know how to play chess. As such, there were only two possible explanations for Jing Jiu's behavior. Jing Jiu had blocked a large area of his own go pieces, so Tong Yan's response would be different from what he had planned in advance, which could prove what he had just said. Nobody could predict all the possible responses of his opponent, including himself. Yet, what was the point of proving it? How could he admit defeat in such a way and then leave without losing face? The crowd thought it was a clever response, so they laughed kindly. Tong Yin didn't laugh, looking at the chessboard in silence. Grand Scholar Guo didn't laugh either, looking at the chessboard thoughtfully. He was the one who played this chess game, so he had a thorough understanding of it. What they were looking at was not the black go piece, but another spot on the chessboard. Before Jing Jiu left, he knocked on the chessboard with his finger, and it was at this spot. After a long while, Grand Scholar Guo said sentimentally, "That's awesome." Tong Yin said expressionlessly, "It's not bad." Zhao Liu didn't know how to play chess, but she knew that Jing Jiu's move was suicide. It was a real suicide, not jumping off the cliff. There wouldn't be a miracle, and it was impossible for the black go piece to turn defeat into victory because it had a new space. That kind of strange game was mostly recorded in stories, and it would never happen in the real world, not to mention that his opponent was the best chess player in the world. Then, what was the meaning of Jing Jiu's action? Jing Jiu said, "He definitely didn't expect that I would make such a move, so he definitely didn't know what his next move would be." Zhao Liu thought he was acting like a child throwing a tantrum, and sighed. "Is it interesting to do so?" Jing Jiu said, "I just want to tell him that he can't predict his opponent's thoughts by relying on his imagination and intuition. He has to calculate all the possibilities in the end." Thinking of what Tong Yin said earlier, Zhao Liu asked, "Can you really calculate all the possibilities on the chessboard?" Jing Jiu said, "Not all the calculations need to have a result. Sometimes we only need some numbers to help us choose the direction of our next move. But it's best if we can calculate everything clearly. The chess book you bought for me talks about the potential, beauty, shape, and space. Many people believe in this, but it's because they can't calculate everything clearly." Zhao Liu said after some thought, "Maybe it's true, but it's a bit uncomfortable and cold to listen to." Looking at the night sky, Jing Jiu said, "It's because we're human beings who are good at comforting ourselves with beautiful words and definitions, and the world is like this." Chapter 140. There were no clouds in the night sky, and there were not many stars either. The stars were hanging high and far away, looking desolate. Was the world like this all along? No, it couldn't be described as cold or warm. It was because there was no cold or heat before the human beings. How could the living be united with the eternal heaven and earth? Death or immortality? Only the great souls can be immortal. Zhao Liu murmured while looking at the starry sky. Jing Jiu said, "Only the immortal can be immortal." Zhao Liu remembered that he had said something similar. The benevolent are invincible? No, only the invincible can be invincible. Then, how can one become an immortal? I don't know. It's impossible to prove immortality. Jing Jiao continued while looking at the night sky. Fortunately, there is no need to prove it. Looking at his profile, Zhao Lei had the same feeling again, as if she was looking at a bottomless abyss. He was right in front of her, but he seemed to be in a distant place, and she couldn't catch up with him no matter how hard she tried. The most incredible conjecture came to her mind again. Though it was impossible, she was very familiar with this feeling. She had had this feeling since she was a child when she learned that she was the personal disciple chosen by the immortal Jingyang. She didn't dare think about it any further, so she changed the topic. Did Tong Yin wait for you today? I think so. He could predict that we would show up, and his calculation ability is indeed very good. Why did he do that? He should have read my chess playing records. Jing Jiao said, he doesn't like the way I play chess, but he has to admit my chess skill. So he wants to meet me. Zhao Lei asked, which of you is better at chess? He has no chance of beating me in chess. Jing Jiao said calmly, I'm not as good as him in chess. The black go piece he placed before he left the chess stall was merely a camouflage. The real place he placed his go piece was the place he pointed at. Tong Yin and Grand Scholar Gua should be able to understand what he meant and figure out how powerful this move was. But it was because he was a bystander. He had calculated for a long time before coming up with that move. If he were asked to replace Grand Scholar Gua's position and play a whole game of chess with Tong Yin, he would be at a great disadvantage. Zhao Lei reached out to untie her braid. She felt much more relaxed, but her heart was still a little heavy. What she had said to Xiang Wan Shu at the Four Seas banquet had led to the following events. Now that she thought about it, she felt a little regretful. When he arrived at Xinjiku, he would turn left to reach Taichung Temple. He would turn right to cross the Raven Bridge. After 3 more blocks, he would reach the Zhao residence. Zhao Lei stopped and asked, what kind of person is Tong Yin? Jing Jiao said, I don't know. What about you? Zhao Lei shook her head. I don't know either. In some ways, Jing Jiao and Zhao Lei were 2 different types of cultivators. They never seemed to care about anything. They didn't care about food and vegetables like regular people did, and they didn't care about the warmth of spring and the blooming of flowers like poets did. They didn't care about the future and fate of the human race like Lo Huainan did, and they didn't care about the outcome and the mystery of the black and white world like Tong Yin did. They didn't even care about the opponents on the path of cultivation that they should pay attention to. I'll ask my family when I get back, Zhao Lei said after some thought. Jing Jiao thought that he had a family now, so he said, I'll ask them when I get back. As they were about to leave, Zhao Lei suddenly thought of something, asking, have you ever played Mahjong? Jing Jiao said after some hesitation, I've been forced to play it a few times. They said they needed 1 more player, so I had to play it. Zhao Lei was startled, even more so than when she found out that Jing Jiao was injured in the nunnery. Jing Jiao didn't care about anything, and he was extremely lazy. Who could force him to do something he didn't want to do? The 9 peaks of Aoyama were all shrouded in the clouds and fog. The fog on Shanda Peak wasn't as thick as that on Sword Peak, but it was much colder. Perhaps it was because of the dark well leading to the underground? Yuan Qijing stood in the deepest part of the manor cave, looking at the bottom of the well expressionlessly. It was unclear what he was thinking. He had finally broken through the state a few years ago and became another figure in the heavenly arrival state after the sect master of Aoyama. The reputation of the Aoyama sect grew, and his status in Aoyama became even more unshakable. In many people's eyes, he was already a threat to the status of the sect master. Yet, he had kept a low profile over the years, doing nothing but looking at the well, as if there was a wonderful view in it. Tingguang Peak was the highest peak, and the top of the peak was above the clouds. As a result, the sunlight here was the best, and it felt warm when it shone on the body. The scenery here was also the best. The sect master pulled back his line of sight from Shuriwe Peak and shook his head. He walked back to the front of the stone monument and looked at the sheath inserted into the monument thoughtfully. A leisurely and experienced energy came out from the bottom of the stone monument. The round turtle opened his eyes slowly and glanced at him with a bewildered expression. As the oldest principal guardian beast of Aoyama, he had accompanied many generations of the sect masters of Aoyama and had also seen them off. Until now, he still didn't understand why these sect masters always had a worried expression on their faces. Didn't they know that worrying was harmful to their Tao heart? That was why few of them had succeeded in ascending. What was it that they couldn't get over? In the northwest of Chaotian, there was a large snowland and high mountains. It was vast, barren, and exceedingly cold. It was rarely inhabited, so it was called the Coal Mountain. Kunlun Mountain, Heavenly Mountain, and Crow Mountain were all part of this mountain range. It was also the hiding place of the deviant sects and the Devil Men. It was said that the headquarters of the mysterious dark sect was located here. It was already spring in Xiaoga City, but it was still snowing here, and it was extremely cold. A black speck appeared in the distance in the snowland, and it was getting closer and closer. The sound of flute grew clearer and more pleasant. A shepherd boy was playing the flute in the heavy snow. The person playing the flute was not the shepherd boy, but a young man. The young man had clean eyes and brows, showing a sense of carefreeness, and his smile was indescribable. He didn't ride a yellow ox, but a yak, its black and dirty long hair almost reaching the ground. The flute he was playing was not a regular bamboo flute, but a bone flute. A faint bloodline could be vaguely seen in the middle of the yellowish bone flute, which looked like a human bone. The sound of the flute stopped abruptly. A paper crane flew out from the snowflakes and landed on his palm, turning into a letter. The young man knew the content of the letter without reading it, and he smiled sheepishly. Little Fourth, why is this kid so impatient? He wants to use a swindler as a weapon. Your young senior master isn't so easy to deal with. There was no path here, only snow and cliffs. Yet, the young man seemed to have an invisible path in his eyes. He rode the yak toward the cold mountain without any hesitation. When he arrived in the middle of the mountain full of cliffs and rocks, he jumped off the yak and walked to the front of a cliff wall. He knocked on the cliff wall with his index finger. The sound was deep and solid, indicating that it was not empty inside, so it couldn't accommodate anyone. Chapter 141. The hidden swordsmen were not the cultivation practitioners who used the swords to escape to heaven and earth, but those who hid in heaven and earth to avoid the swords. What they avoided was the swords of the sword sect of Aoyama. There were 3 hidden swordsmen in the world. They were all the enemies of the sword sect of Aoyama, and the sword sect of Aoyama announced to heaven and earth that they had to be killed. As long as they dared show up, the sword sect of Aoyama would kill them with 1 sword or 10,000 swords. The former referred to the inherited heaven sword of the sect master of Aoyama, and the latter referred to the sword formation of Aoyama. Killing them with 1 sword from tens of thousands of miles away sounded like a miracle, but how could it be true? However, the sect master of Aoyama had a profound cultivation state and that famous sword, as well as the unimaginably profound resources of the sword sect of Aoyama, could have done it. The reason why the whole of Chaotian believed it was that the 3 hidden swordsmen never showed up again after the sword sect of Aoyama announced it. No matter how high their cultivation states were, or how profound their backgrounds were, the 3 of them had disappeared. This was how the name of the hidden swordsmen came about. Those who had offended the Aoyama sect to such an extent must have done something cruel to the Aoyama sect, so they couldn't be ordinary people, and their cultivation states and methods must be extraordinary. It was rumored that the oldest hidden swordsman was an immortal swordsman in the heavenly arrival state in the South Ocean. At the most dangerous moment, he activated the Great Formation to confine the island where his sect was located in the ocean fog by the huge whirlpool in the south. As a result, he was able to avoid being killed. It was said that the second hidden swordsman was the successor of the previous imperial court. In order to regain the imperial power, he caused many tragedies in the world. The sword sect of Aoyama lost dozens of outstanding disciples in this rebellion, which was not recorded in detail in the historical records. That person relied on the shell of a 10,000-year-old tortoise to escape from the pursuit of the Tianguang Peak. It was rumored that this person concealed his identity and lived in an ordinary city by the Ozawa River. He didn't dare take off the tortoise shell for even a moment. The third hidden swordsman was even more famous. He was the third grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. This grandmaster of the third generation was a famous demonic swordsman in the history of cultivation. He was killed by the sword sect of Aoyama because he had harmed a few disciples of Qingrong Peak. At first, he didn't care much about it, and he wanted to lead the mysterious dark sect to confront the Aoyama sect head-on. However, after a bloody battle, the headquarters of the mysterious dark sect was destroyed, and more than half of the swordsmen of the sect were killed or wounded. The disciples of various branches were scattered all over the north, and they couldn't recover their former glory until now. The ancestral master himself had been terrorized by the Aoyama sword sect and was hiding deep underground, unable to see the light of day again. The story of the hidden swordsman was one of the most famous legends in Chaotian. The three hidden swordsmen had never appeared again. Perhaps they were already dead. These legends were still circulating in the world, and even ordinary people knew about them. There were also many speculations or doubts that the story of the hidden swordsman was created by the Aoyama sword sect. Since the three of them did not dare to appear, who could prove it? As time went by, the story would spread more widely, and the image of the sword sect of Aoyama would become more and more formidable. More and more people thought so, in addition to the Zhongzhou school, the Guochang temple, the Platonist sect, and other cultivation sects with a long history. It wasn't until today when someone came to the precipice while playing the flute in the heavy snow and said, "Come out." If it was true, the hidden swordsman in the precipice should be the great grandmaster of the third generation of the mysterious dark sect. He had a formidable cultivation state, but he didn't dare show up because of the sword formation of Aoyama. The sound of the flute had died down, and only the whistling of the north wind could be heard in the mountain. "You should still remember who I am. I'm so weak now. Don't you want to come out and kill me to vent your anger?" The young man said this with a smile. It was quiet on the precipice. There was no response. The young man said in a mocking tone, "The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect has been forced to act like a mouse by our Aoyama sect. Don't you feel ashamed?" There was still no response. The young man turned around and said while looking at the wind and snow in the sky, while holding his waist, "Now that I've found you, where else can you escape to?" It was unclear where this young man came from, but he dared talk to the great grandmaster in such a manner even though his cultivation state was rather low, and he didn't show any fear on his face. "Yeah, I can't get in as long as you don't come out." The young man continued with a smile while raising his eyebrows. "I can inform the juniors of the Aoyama sect." There was still no response, but a faint tremor could be heard in the deep end of the underground. "You asked me what I, a madman, want to do." Seeing the wind and snow getting stronger, the young man said one thing after a long moment of silence. "I just want to take back what belongs to me. I haven't played the mahjong tiles for a long time. Do you want to be my new mahjong partner?" The drizzle fell again in Zhaoga City. The patter of rain made the moss green and the eaves wet. Back in the manor house, Jing Jiu walked along the roof corridor and was about to return to his own room. Seeing his elder brother in the living room, he halted his steps and asked, "Do you play mahjong?" The eldest brother of the Jing family replied hastily, "Sometimes, but not often." Do you want to play?" "I'm just asking," replied Jing Jiu, thinking of what he had said last time. "Have you bet on the Go game?" The eldest brother of the Jing family understood what Jing Jiu meant, nodding blankly. After a moment of silence, Jing Jiu suddenly asked, "Can I withdraw from the game?" The expression on the eldest brother of the Jing family's face grew nervous as he said, "It seems impossible." "Well, do you have any books related to the Go game at home? I'd like to read them tonight." Hearing this, the eldest brother of the Jing family looked even more excited as he said in a trembling voice, "I'll go look for them." After listening to the sound of the rain for a while and drinking a cup of tea, Jingjiu found a Go game and started putting the pieces on the board. The Go pieces were placed on the board one by one. The positions and order were exactly the same as the game outside the old plum garden. After some thought, Jing Jiu started putting the go pieces on the board again. This time, he played the black go piece and moved by himself. It didn't take long before the game was over. The final result was decided by half a go piece. If Jing Jiu started from the beginning, the result would be better than Grand Scholar was, but it would still be tiring. Jing Jiu coughed twice. It was unclear whether it was the cold air brought by the spring rain or the tiredness that affected his injury. The Duke of he happened to come out from the underground tunnel. Hearing Jing Jiu's coughing, his expression changed abruptly, asking worriedly, "Is the immortal master all right?" Jing Jiu didn't pay any attention to him and asked directly, "What kind of person is Tong Yin?" In fact, Jing Jiu didn't care about this question, even though he had just met her outside the old plum garden and witnessed her profound ghost state. What if he lost at the plum meeting? What would he do if he lost? If it was the Jing Jiu of a few hundred years ago, he would have thought so. Even Jing Jiu couldn't be the best at everything in the world. But for the sake of little Liu and the wealth and freedom of the Jing family, it seemed that he had to win. As such, he had to take it more seriously. The Duke of Yi's response was quick and clever. He didn't mention Tong Yan's hometown, cultivation state, or hobbies, but gave us seemingly boring information. Normally, this kind of information was only sought and exchanged by those women who walked the streets and alleys. Tong Yan is the son-in-law chosen by the wife of the sect-master of the Zhongzhou school for her daughter, but he doesn't want to be the son-in-law. The Duke of Yi continued with a small smile. It's said that it's because he knows that Lo Huainan is the son-in-law chosen by the sect-master himself. Hearing this, Jing Jiu recalled the weak young girl who played zither at the plum meeting today. Chapter 142. I wrote Duke Lu as Duke of Yi yesterday. Sorry, I haven't finished my business yet, so I'm a bit confused. Duke Lu told him something about Tong Yan. The Zhongzhou school had a close relationship with the royal family, and Duke Lu was in charge of Taichung Temple, so he knew many secrets that the regular people didn't know. Silence. Jing Jiu listened to him, and he figured out why that child always had a cold, aloof, and loathsome appearance. Jing Jiu picked up the teacup and took a sip, coughing twice. "What's wrong with you?" The worried expression on Duke Lu's face was even more obvious. The cultivation practitioners wouldn't catch a cold, so they wouldn't cough no matter how cold the tea was. The whole of Zhaoga City had learned what had happened outside the old plum garden. He knew that Jing Jiu was there, and Jing Jiu wanted to know what had happened to Tong Yan, so he couldn't help but guess that Jing Jiu might have suffered some kind of loss. Jing Jiu said, "I met Tian Jingren in the old plum garden." Duke Lu also knew about it, feeling puzzled, wondering if something had happened at the time. "He wanted to kill me." Jing Jiu didn't tell him what Tian Jingren had done. Those spiritual awareness slid into his body, and it was more likely that they wanted to spy on him. But this method had already threatened his existence, and if it had succeeded, his life would have been in Tian Jingren's hands. In his eyes, Tian Jingren wanted to kill him. Duke Lu's expression had changed dramatically, and the wrinkles on his face looked like a big flower, not because he was happy, but because he was serious. He was shocked, and he didn't understand why Tian Jingren, a master, would do such a thing to Jing Jiu. If he hadn't left the old plum garden tonight, his killing of me would have been an internal affair of Aoyama. Hearing this, Duke Lu realized that he should send someone to keep an eye on the old plum garden right away. Jing Jiu didn't need to make any arrangements for this kind of thing. Duke Lu said worriedly, "It's not easy for me to investigate the internal affairs of Aoyama." Jing Jiu said, "There's no need to check. It's Fang Jingtian." Duke Lu was shocked again, and his heart felt heavy. Fang Jingtian was the master of the Shilai Peak of the Aoyama sect, a big shot in the Broken Sea state. Jing Jiu told him the name directly, which meant that he had absolute trust in him. This kind of trust also represented self-confidence. He was confident that the Lu family would not betray him. Or did he not dare to? But why was that? Many years ago, after Duke Lu inherited this secret from his father, he began to think about this problem. Even now he did not understand it, but he told himself that it was all very well, so that he would not have to think too much about other things. Tian Jinren is not easy to deal with. Duke Lu didn't hide his difficulties. There were 27 state dukes in the human imperial court, and he was the most powerful one, though he kept a low profile. The problem was that even he couldn't deal with Tian Jinren. Tian Jinren was a master of calculation, admired by the populace, and the Institute of White Deer was famous far and wide, and he was the close friend and half-master of the godly swordsman of West Ocean. Not to mention that he came to Chaoga City because the Divine Emperor had personally invited him to do so. Hearing this, Jingjiu felt surprised, asking why. Duke Lu didn't answer this question directly, saying the invitation to Zen Master was sent around the same time. Jingjiu understood now, asking, "What does the Emperor want to calculate?" Duke Lu said hesitantly in a low voice, "I don't dare to guess." Jingjiu asked, "Who came from Shui Yu Nunnery?" There were many cultivation sects in the land, and many highly achieved swordsmen of the previous generations were good at calculating, but the most famous ones were Shui Yu Nunnery and the Guochang Temple. Before the appearance of Tian Jinren, all the cultivation practitioners wanted to obtain the fortune stick or zither evaluation from these two sections. The chief nun is behind closed doors, so she didn't come. Duke Lu said, "The one who came is very mysterious. I don't know who he is even now." After a moment of silence, Jingjiu asked, "Do you want to know how many years you have left to live?" Duke Lu didn't dare respond. The emperor had invited the Zen master and Tian Jinren of the Guochang Temple in person, and he also intended to invite the chief nun of Shui Yu Nunnery. What did you want to calculate by paying so much attention to them? Even the most powerful human beings in the land had an unfathomable cultivation state. As long as they couldn't ascend, they would have to face these questions at the end of their lives. When death was near, some emperors would keep on making magic pills and taking medicine in order to live longer, and some emperors would rather throw away their lives and have a big party. The current emperor was a wise emperor. He wanted to know the length of his life because he wanted to make arrangements for his own and the human race after his death. Jingjiu suddenly said, "I want to go to the palace." Naturally, this meant that he wanted Duke Lu to make arrangements. Duke Lu was very surprised, but he didn't say anything. "When?" he asked. Jingjiu stood up and said now. It was late at night, and no one else would have been able to enter the royal palace on the spur of the moment. Not even the most popular official in the imperial court. But Duke Lu could, because the affairs of Taichung Temple required frequent contact with the palace. More importantly, starting from the previous emperor, Duke Lu had been deeply trusted by the two generations of Emperor Shun. No matter how low-key he had been, after all the ups and downs over the years, both those in the court and those in the palace had long since understood. The corner gate of the royal palace opened noiselessly, and Duke Lu walked in with a young man wearing a bamboo hat. This scene was naturally seen by many people, but both the guards and the eunuchs who happened to be passing by turned around with a tacit understanding, pretending not to have seen it. The people living in the royal palace didn't want to be thought of as someone with ulterior motives, and even less wanted to be accused of prying into the emperor's will. Clouds came from the south, blocking the starlight. It was dark in the royal palace, but the lights in the basilica seemed especially warm. Duke Lu stood on the stone steps in front of the basilica, his eyes slightly narrowed, watching the movements around him like a hawk. Finally, his line of sight was attracted by his slanted shadow. He didn't expect His Majesty to actually agree to see Jingjiu, and in the basilica at that. It should be noted that Jingjiu's identity was only an ordinary disciple of the Aoyama sect. Why? He looked at his own shadow and thought silently, and a smile gradually appeared on his lips. Many years ago, he told his father that the thing that the House of Duke had been most worried about for hundreds of years, the shadow. Now it seemed that he had thought too much. His father was right. The will of His Majesty the Emperor and the will of the owner of the wooden plate were indeed the same. The basilica was very quiet, and no sound of conversation could be heard. Occasionally, there was the sound of coughing, which should be Jingjiu. Occasionally, there was a hearty laugh, which should be His Majesty. Not long after, the door of the basilica opened, and Jingjiu walked out. Duke Lu didn't know what he said to His Majesty, but he didn't ask. He led him out of the royal palace. Back in the manor house, Jing Jiu smiled when he saw the pile of chess books piled up like a small hill. He randomly picked up a book and knew that this level of chess book was definitely not something that his brother in the front yard could find. It should be Duke Lu's handwriting. He brewed tea, took out a bamboo chair, lay down comfortably, and began to read. It was drizzling again, knocking on the window. Coupled with those boring chess books, it was best for him to fall asleep. Chapter 143. 3 shocking pieces of news came out on the first day of the plum meeting. The first piece of news was that the winner of the zither competition at the plum meeting wasn't by Zhao, the favored girl of the Zhongzhou school, but a young woman from Shuai Nunnery. The name of the young woman was Guodong, and it was said that she was the personal disciple of Lin Sanyue. She had an ordinary appearance and claimed that it was her first time playing zither, but she was praised by Zen Master, and even by Zhao felt inferior. Anyway, the winner was Shuai Nunnery. This famous saying in the cultivation circle was confirmed again. The second piece of news was that Tong Yin didn't participate in the plum meeting on the first day, but went to the old plum garden. He won more than 30 games in a row on the street outside the garden, and he defeated the famous number 1 chess player of the imperial court, Grand Scholar Wu, in the middle game. Another interesting thing was the conversation between Tong Yin and Jing Jiu. The most important piece of news was that Tian Jingren had been cultivating in the old plum garden. It turned out that Tian Jingren, whom many people had been searching for, was cultivating in seclusion here. Lo Huainan had successfully visited Tian Jingren, and the content of his questions had been spread out. As Jing Jiu had said, his reputation had improved again. Many people knew that Zhao Liu and Jing Jiu had also come to the nunnery, but nobody knew what they had asked and how Tian Jingren had answered them. And nobody knew that something else had happened the night before. After Jing Jiu entered the palace, the emperor had a long talk with this ordinary disciple of the Aoyama sect. In the early morning, the plum garden was covered with a thin fog. Tian Jingren's behavior was simple and unadorned. He refused all the highly achieved swordsmen of the Western Sea Sword School and the disciples of the White Deer Institute who wanted to protect him. He only brought a child to take care of his daily life. The more he did so, the better his reputation was in the world, and he was respected and admired by people. The child came out while rubbing his sleepy eyes, ready to pick a few red plums to put in a vase. The officials of the Pure Heaven Bureau, who had been guarding outside the garden all night, saw the scene and confirmed that Tian Jingren hadn't left, so they sent the news back to the royal palace. Soon, a letter left the royal palace and was delivered to the Net Perception Temple. Then, a letter left the Net Perception Temple and was delivered to the old plum garden. At that time, the boy had just finished serving the red plums in the bottle and was still yawning. After taking over the letter, Tian Jingren knew the content of the letter as soon as he touched it with his fingers. It was not because his consciousness was connected to the spirit, but because the Zen idea attached to the letter directly entered into his heart. The letter was written by Zen Master himself, inviting him to the Net Perception Temple today. After a moment of silence, Tian Jingren said, "Prepare the car to go to the Net Perception Temple." The boy was a little surprised and a little worried. The Diana Almighty, who was as famous as teacher, wanted to see teacher. Maybe they wanted to test each other. Mr. had just vomited blood yesterday. Could he hold on? The spring rain had stopped long ago. After a night of nourishment, the soil was soft and the blue stone was glowing faintly like black jade. The petals that had been blown down by the rain fell on the wet floor, looking like the pastels that had just been touched by a painter. It was very beautiful. Tian Jingren couldn't see such a beautiful scene, but he could smell the moisture in the air, the smoke coming from the ancient temple, and the faint fragrance of flower petals. He said, "Peach and plum spring breeze, you should have a cup of wine. Monks can't drink wine." A voice came from somewhere. The Net Perception Temple was quiet in the early morning. There was no morning bell, and no monks were walking around. Where the incense that was turning into white smoke lit last night. The boy had been supporting Tian Jingren, but now he suddenly disappeared without a trace. No one knew where he had gone. Patter, patter. The man's footsteps were a little strange, like a cat drinking water or a horse stepping on the mud. It was a teenager with a thin layer of black hair on his head. The dark red frock on his body was half open, looking very casual. His eyes were bright and clean, but his feet were not wearing shoes. They were wet and muddy, looking dirty. Tian Jingren said with a smile, "Wine and meat pass through the intestines." The young monk waved his hand and said, "Eating is eating, doing is doing. You are too stubborn to say that it doesn't exist." Tian Jingren didn't say anything more. He bowed slightly and said, "Zen master summoned me here. What advice does he have for me?" It turned out that the young monk was the rumored Zen master. In the eyes of the mortals and the regular cultivation practitioners, he was a master as famous as this young monk. Yet he was fully aware that he was far inferior to the young monk in terms of seniority, status, and cultivation state. So he bowed respectfully. Zen master asked, "The emperor invited you and me to Zhaoga City for a very clear reason. What do you think?" Tian Jingren said, "The matter concerns the fate of our tribe, so I don't dare refuse it because it's hard to predict the natural law. I should try my best to calculate it in order to be at ease." Zen master asked curiously, "I heard that you told His Highness about the deadline of 100 years yesterday." Tian Jingren didn't deny it, saying, "I can only calculate this roughly." It seemed that Zen master felt a bit itchy, so he walked to a peach tree and rubbed the mud on his feet on it. "I invited you here because I received a letter for the emperor this morning." Tian Jingren couldn't see anything, and his eyes didn't reveal any emotion. "Is that so?" he asked calmly. Zen master said, "The ink on the letter is still wet, so it should have been written not long ago. I think the emperor must have stayed up all night, so he must be very worried." Tian Jingren praised, "The emperor cares about the state and the people, and is diligent in managing the state affairs. It's a blessing for the people." After making sure that the mud on his feet was almost wiped clean, Zen master nodded satisfactorily, saying, "Is it a matter concerning the state affairs?" "No, he's just worried about the descendant of an old friend." Tian Jingren had vaguely guessed what Jingjio meant, the expression in his grayish-white eyes growing quieter and deeper. "Is it Fong Jingtian?" Zen master suddenly asked. He had already discovered Fong Jingtian when the fake manor cave of the immortal Jingyang was opened that night. It was because Fong Jingtian had a murderous intent toward Jingjio at that moment. It was for this reason that he used the lotus cloud to protect Jingjio when he left. Tian Jingren didn't answer this question. The morning light had already occupied the courtyard. The sky was blue, but there was no trace of the sun. Zen master looked at the sky and murmured to himself, "Is it because of the story of an old friend?" Tian Jingren said calmly, "Since Zen master has made up his mind about this matter, he didn't ask me to come here to listen to my explanation." Zen master withdrew his gaze and looked at him, saying, "You're right. You and I both understand that everything in the world can be decided by a single thought. It doesn't matter whether you tell me or not." Tian Jingren understood what he meant, but he was still a little confused, asking, "Why did Zen master show up for this matter?" "Because that young man should also be the descendant of an old friend of mine." Zen master's voice was full of emotion and reminiscence. Then he started to walk into the distance of the forest, not caring that his feet were stained with the wet mud again. Zen master left just like that. The forest was quiet. On the soft grass were the footprints left by Zen master. Under the worn turf, there was muddy soil. White lotus flowers grew in the mud. One step, one flower. This was the thought left by Zen master. Tian Jingren stared at the white lotus flowers growing in the mud, his grayish-white eyes filled with the aura of death. He didn't know if he could leave here alive. Chapter 144. A bird suddenly chirped in the forest, crisp and pleasant. Amid the chirping, the white lotus swayed slightly in the wind, giving off a band of green smoke, for which a human figure gradually emerged. It was a beautiful woman in a light gauze, dancing along with the quivering petals. Her dancing posture was graceful, her figure alluring, and her eyes moving, making the onlookers' minds tremble. Seeing this, Tian Jingren rolled his eyes. His grayish-white eyes looked especially terrifying. Everybody knew that Zen Master was the most unpredictable figure in all of Chaotian. He might be able to compete with Zen Master in deducing the heavenly secrets, but he was well aware that his cultivation state was far inferior to his opponent. Yet, Zen Master didn't do it himself, leaving only a piece of Zen thought. It seemed that the method employed by that piece of Zen thought wasn't that marvelous. Tian Jingren calmed down and took out a dozen bronze coins of the former imperial court from his sleeve, throwing them in front of him in a seemingly casual manner. The bronze coins dropped on the muddy ground, some sinking vertically into the mud, some lying in the muddy water, and some rolling in all directions. Tian Jingren walked forward following the bronze coins. He wasn't tempted by the women dancing on the white lotus, and he didn't even use the white bone temple to help him. As he walked, his clothes fluttered in the wind, and a light emitted from his body, giving him the feeling of walking like a dragon or a tiger. The chirping of the birds in the forest suddenly became louder. The white lotus swayed more rapidly in the wind, and the women dancing among the petals moved more alluring, their clothes falling off gradually. Tian Jingren raised his eyebrows. A dozen energies came out from the square holes on the bronze coins, carrying the scent of alcohol and the sweetness of peaches and plums, which smelled very good. The women dancing among the petals were intoxicated by the energies, their steps disordered and their eyes blurred, and they unwittingly came to the edge of the lotus. Ah! Ah! Along with the screams, the women fell down from the lotus and onto the muddy ground, and then kept falling down. It was unclear whether they would fall into the yellow spring or the abyss. Tian Jingren didn't take a look at them, continuing to walk toward the outside of the forest. All of a sudden, a gust of strong wind came from outside the forest, carrying the grass and stones wet by the rain and hitting the tree trunks, making paw sounds. The white lotus formed by Zen Master's footsteps swayed even more violently, as if it would snap at any moment. The next moment, the lotus branch did not break, and the wind abruptly subsided. The forest suddenly became incomparably quiet. More than 10 statues of deities appeared on the white lotus. Those white lotuses were originally very small, and the deity statues in them should be even smaller. However, for some reason, they gave people the feeling that they were incomparably tall, making people feel reverence. There were Buddhas, bodhisattvas, dragons, and elephants. The true bodies of the gods reached the sky. Tian Jingren's pupils shrank slightly. His robe sleeves fluttered, releasing 2 strands of extremely chilling and mysterious aura. The aura exuded from the bronze coin suddenly condensed into a solid form, turning into a tree branch with 2 or 3 pinkish-white peach blossoms growing on it. The peach branch soared into the air and lashed out at the statue on the lotus. It was like sticking out of the courtyard to chase away those poor scholars who peeped at their own scenery. With a cracking sound, the peach branch drooped back, and the petals splashed in all directions. In the end, those deities and Buddhas were not touched at all. Tian Jingren did not panic. He thought quietly, no matter how many deities and Buddhas you have, you are still in the world. I won't tell you that one flower is one world. I only ask that you perish together with the world. After several contacts, he had already deduced how powerful the Zen thought left by Zen Master was. He decided not to hold back anymore and directly break the inhibition set by the other party. With a clear roar, the thought that he had cultivated in White Deer Institute for many years rushed out like a great river, with an incomparably majestic momentum. The edges of the white lotuses withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Those statues of deities and Buddhas also gradually retreated, as if they were about to disappear into the night. The question was, where did the night come from? The great river stopped in the darkening sky, gradually fading. It was not the Zen thought left by Zen Master that launched a counterattack. It was Tian Jingren himself who stopped the attack. He slowly withdrew his hands. His face was pale. At the moment of life and death, he suddenly remembered something. Those white lotuses, dancing girls, Buddhas, and bodhisattvas. How did he see them? How could he see them? There were many things in the world that didn't need to be figured out. It was enough to just think about them. For example, life and death. Tian Jingren thought about why he could see them, and that was enough. So he stopped seeing them. A lotus fell into the night. A bird returned to its nest. An old Buddha lived in seclusion. All the sharpness and brightness of everything in the world faded away. Note, these 4 sentences were written by Li Ao. I will open the world after my return. Everything was unreal. White lotuses, dancing girls, deities and Buddhas, birds chirping, and peaches and plums in the spring breeze were all his thoughts. Tian Jingren recalled what the young Zen master had said before he left. Everything was in one thought. The deities and Buddhas in the sky were gone. So how could there be lotuses? There are no peach blossoms, only blood dripping on his body. Tian Jingren sat on the ground, with his long hair hanging loosely and blood all over his body. He looked extremely miserable. The boy didn't go far. It turned out that he had been by his side all the time. He shouted with a frightened face, "Sir, what's wrong with you?" 2 streams of blood flowed out from Tian Jingren's eyes, making his face look even paler. His voice was extremely low. "Let's go." It was Zen Master's mercy that he was still alive. Of course, if he hadn't woken up and continued to attack the deities and Buddhas in the sky, those attacks would have hit his Tao heart. Even if he could survive, he would have become an idiot. The boy didn't dare say anything more. He helped him walk out of the net perception temple. Tian Jingren didn't go back to the old plum garden, but left Zhaoga City directly. His cultivation state had been greatly damaged, so he couldn't calculate the heavenly secrets for 10 years. More importantly, his mind was damaged severely, and it was unknown when he could recover. Could the stream water and the sound of reading at the Institute of White Deer help him calm down? What would the reaction of the godly swordsman by the West Ocean be when he learned of this? The news that Tian Jingren had left Zhaoga City shocked many people, causing many speculations. Some people said that he had the demeanor of a highly achieved swordsman. He left after finishing his task, hiding himself and his name, unwilling to stay in the mortal world any longer. Some people said that he had studied the heavenly ways for the sake of the future of his nation, so he was counterattacked by the heavenly ways. His lifespan and cultivation state were greatly damaged, and he needed to recuperate. Jingzhou, of course, knew that these were all untrue. Seeing his expression, Zhao Liu had vaguely guessed the truth. She was a bit surprised, but she also thought it was reasonable. But she was curious about how he had done it. Jingzhou didn't explain. He thought that these 2 rumors must have been pushed by some people in the imperial court and the Western Sea Sword School, so he felt it was troublesome. It wasn't that the situation was difficult to solve. It was literally what it meant. Jingzhou thought it was very troublesome to deal with and think about these things. Zhao Liu had the same thought. Then they thought of one thing at the same time. They should take Gu Qing with them if they wanted to leave Aoyama and travel the world in the future. Zhao Liu didn't know about this beforehand. She came to find Jingzhou for another piece of news. Do you know where the emperor is going? Where? Chapter 145. After Tian Jingren left, the plum meeting had to continue, but many cultivation practitioners felt it was a pity that they had missed the opportunity to learn from the grandmasters. The disciple of Shui Yu Nunnery, Guidong, had won first place in the zither tournament. Next was the chess tournament. In the past plum meetings, the chess tournament had received the least attention. It was not because people were not interested in it, but because the outcome was already determined. Just like the saying, the winner is always the Water Moon Nunnery. When it came to chess, the winner was always Tong Yen. However, the situation was a bit different this year. The chess tournament had attracted more attention. Of course, nobody doubted that the final winner would be Tong Yen. He had just defeated the number 1 chess player in the imperial court, Grand Scholarwa, in a middle game outside the Old Plum Garden the day before, and then he had defeated a dozen highly achieved chess players in Xiaoga City. His victory was unprecedented. Yet, many people focused their attention on another person, Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao had become famous in the cultivation circle. It was because he was the personal disciple of the immortal Jing Yang, and he and Zhao Liu were the youngest masters of the second generation in the Aoyama sect. Jing Jiao had won first place in the chess tournament at the Four Seas banquet, but he was still ranked very low in the list of the curtain rollers. He was not a threat to Tong Yin, and he might not even be able to meet Tong Yin in the chess tournament. Many people wondered why Tong Yin asked Jing Jiao to watch the chess game and say those words. Why did Jing Jiao and Grand Scholar stare at the game for a long time after Jing Jiao put down the black go piece with a hint of cleverness? Someone had asked Grand Scholar about it, but Grand Scholar only smiled without saying a word. All these events made people speculate and imagine, and they became more and more interested in the chess tournament. What pushed the chess tournament to its climax were two recent events. One of them was that the emperor would come to the tournament in person. In the past Plum meetings, the emperor would only show up at the last event, the cultivation tournament. Why did he pay so much attention to the chess tournament this year? Hearing Zhao Liu's explanation, Jing Jiao shook his head, wondering why the emperor had so much free time. There would always be a break in the endless spring rain. The morning light shone into the palace. Droplets of water hung on the edge of the green plants outside the window. The light passed through the middle and refracted into many spots of light that fell on the wall. The royal concubine who waved her hand disapprovingly, motioning for the palace servant girls not to disturb her. What's the hurry with washing up? She leaned lazily on the windowsill, smelling the fresh air and looking at the scenery in the garden. She felt very happy, even more beautiful than she was. Part of her good mood stemmed from the words that Tian Jingren had asked the boy to convey to her in the Old Plum Garden yesterday. The other part stemmed from the wonderful night last night. Imagining the scene of silk swaying among the white jade under the candlelight, her cheeks reddened and she revealed a bashful expression. She had been in the palace for so many years, but His Majesty still doted on her. She still couldn't let go and felt very shy. Sometimes she was also very puzzled. Why didn't the rumored racial talent appear on her? Of course, His Majesty's love for her was not only reflected in these aspects. Last night, the Emperor agreed to take her to watch the chess tournament after she acted like a spoiled child by his pillow. This was the true love. As a result, the chess tournament of the Plum meeting would be watched by many people. How embarrassing it would be for that guy, named Jing Jiao, to be defeated by Tong Yin. Thinking of that scene, the royal concubine who laughed contentedly, the tip of her nose wrinkled slightly, looking quite adorable. She was well aware of the status of the Aoyama sect in Chaotian. She had given up the idea of avenging Zhu Gui after Zen Master refused to see her. Yet, she still wanted to do something for that poor guy, as well as to help her vent her anger. What she did was to repay the favor, and also to end the cause and effect. She didn't dare forget what Zen Master had taught her back then. The morning sunlight grew brighter, and the water droplets fell off the edge of the green leaves. The royal concubine had finally gotten up. The palace was always so boring and desolate during the day. She pulled back her gaze from the outside of the window unwillingly and looked at the old eunuch waiting by the side, saying, "Bring me the medicine." She had to take the medicine every morning, the name of which was the Duanli pill. The Duanli pill didn't do any harm to the consumer. On the contrary, it could help to regulate the mind. In addition, it had another function, preventing a woman from getting pregnant. The emperor told her to take the Duanli pill the first day she came to the palace, and since then, she had to take the Duanli pill every morning, even though the emperor didn't come to see her the night before. The emperor didn't send someone to monitor her taking the medicine, nor did he ask someone to force her to take it, but she didn't dare stop taking it for a day. In the beginning, she couldn't help but feel sad and even angry, but she had gradually become numb to it, and it had even become a habit of hers. If she forgot to take the medicine when she woke up one day, she would feel uneasy as if something was wrong. She wouldn't feel at ease until she remembered it and swallowed the medicine. Yet, she felt depressed and unspeakably irritated whenever she thought of taking the medicine. She was born a vixen, so she didn't dare hope to have a child with the emperor. However, the crown prince had been looking at her in a more and more strange way in the last 2 years, including when they were in the plum garden the day before. Thinking of what Tian Jingren had said, she felt a bit hopeful. What if the emperor agreed to it? He loved her so much, but how could she tell him? As she was thinking of all this, she didn't notice that the old eunuch didn't bring her the clean water and the pills as usual. The emperor had decreed before he left that you shouldn't take the medicine anymore. The old eunuch said with a mild expression. Royal concubine who was taken aback and asked in bewilderment, "What did you say?" The old eunuch looked at her with an affectionate expression, saying, "Congratulations, Your Highness." Royal concubine who came back to her senses and covered her mouth with her hands, feeling indescribably shocked. The emperor, allowed her to have a child? What was going on? Who could change the emperor's mind? An indescribable ecstasy rushed into her heart. The happiness came too suddenly. She let out a faint sound. She fainted just like that. "I don't like this prince," Jing Jiao said. "He doesn't have a good sense of propriety and position." Zhao Lei didn't quite understand what Jing Jiao meant and felt it strange, saying, "It doesn't seem like something you would care about." Jing Jiao said, "I don't want to either, but I have no other choice." Zhao Lei still didn't understand what he meant. The current emperor had only one prince, and that was the noble-looking young man in embroidered cloth in the plum garden the day before. Many chancellors and the majority of the populace in the imperial court regarded him as the rightful successor of the dynasty, and they often called him the crown prince. Jingzhou didn't think so. In view of the emperor's cultivation state, he could have children at any time if he wanted to, but he didn't want to. Chapter 146. In the cultivation circle, the cultivation practitioners usually didn't take on disciples until it was very late. This was similar to the reason why the emperor didn't want to have children. There was a deeper meaning behind it. Few people like Jing Jiao and Zhao Lei took on disciples at such a young age. Senior Master. Senior Master. Yao Songzhan greets the two senior masters. As they were talking, Jing Jiao and Zhao Lei were walking on the mountain path. It was foggy in the distance. The disciples of the Aoyama sect suddenly appeared by the side of the path. It was because they were on a mountain. The mountain range was located to the west of Zhaoga City. Many elegant courtyards were built on the mountain range, which was designated as the residence for the cultivation practitioners by the imperial court. It was called the Nishiyama House. The disciples of Aoyama bowed to him in tandem. The expressions in their eyes when they looked at Jing Jiao were a bit complicated. They all knew that the emperor would come to watch the tournament, so they felt a bit nervous. They were worried that Jing Jiao would be nervous. Jing Jiao didn't have a good relationship with many people. His relationship with Liangwang Peak had deteriorated after he had a conflict with Gu Han by the sword-washing stream, and Liangwang Peak was the most desired place for the young disciples. After he had wounded Gu Han and broken Guo Nanshan's sword at the sword trial, his relationship with Liangwang Peak had deteriorated. The disciples of Aoyama were worried about him, not because they respected their masters, but because they had a natural reaction when facing an enemy. Moreover, the person Jing Jiao was going to challenge this time was Tong Yan. As the two peaks of the orthodox cultivation sects, the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school didn't need to mobilize their disciples for any contest. The disciples of Aoyama hoped that Jing Jiao could go further, or at least meet Tong Yan. Otherwise, it would be a disgrace for their sect. They followed the path made of green stone slabs to the deepest part of the manor house and entered the room. The young girl of Qingrong Peak who had led the way left the room soundlessly, but she couldn't help but glance at Jing Jiao once more as she closed the door. A few wisps of light smoke rose from the incense burner. The fragrance was somewhat special and was different from the sedative incense commonly used by Taoist practitioners. It carried a faint fragrance of flowers and fruits, and seemed to carry the salty taste of the sea breeze when one smelled it deeply. Jingjiu knew that this was the rarest highland incense in the Southern Man tribe. In the past, she had sent a lot of them to Shinma Peak. The she mentioned in the statement was the she in front of him at the moment, the peak master Qingrong, Nan Wang. The room was very quiet. No one spoke. Nan Wang looked at Jingjiu for a long time, as if he wanted to see something from his face. Jingjiu looked at her calmly. He did not panic, nor did he retreat. Many years had passed, and the once naive and barbaric girl had become a calm and composed big shot. This kind of feeling seemed to have appeared before. He thought to himself. Nan Wang spoke. You have to win. Her tone was nonchalant, but it carried a lot of weight. It was because these 3 words were not encouragement, but a demand. Nan Wang stood up and walked to the window. Looking at somewhere, she said with a sneer, if someone wants to compete with us, you have to kill them. Can you do that? Zhao Liu shot a glance at Jingjiu. Nan Wang's attitude was very tough. She didn't know how Jingjiu would react. Okay, said Jingjiu calmly. He knew that something must have happened. The Aoyama sect had great resources and confidence, so they wouldn't suddenly pay attention to the chess tournament of the plum meeting just because the emperor was coming to watch. Every plum meeting would have a topic on the agenda, which was the allocation of resources for the cultivation sects in the next few years. This matter had been discussed before the meeting, but for some reason, the Western Sea Sword School suddenly raised a different opinion. This was a major event in the cultivation world, and it was very complicated. As the saying goes, pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. The different opinion of the Western Sea Sword School on the allocation of resources led to a small disagreement between the sword sect of Aoyama and the Zhongzhou school on the allocation of crystals. The disagreement was indeed small, and the small amount of crystals was nothing for the 2 leading sects in the cultivation world. But it was a matter of face or momentum. No sect would give in easily, let alone these 2 sections. How to resolve this disagreement? In the past, it had been decided by the result of the cultivation tournament in the last event of the plum meeting. This year, it was decided by the chess tournament. The Zhongzhou school had no reason not to accept it. Normally, the sword sect of Aoyama wouldn't accept it. However, the emperor said that he would come to the chess tournament in person this year, and a few state dukes took the opportunity to add fuel to the fire, and the matter was settled. Needless to say, those state dukes had been friends with the Zhongzhou school for many years. The 2 of them left the Nishiyama house and walked toward the fog along the mountain path. Why? Asked Zhao Liu. She was referring to his attitude of accepting the matter calmly. Jingjiu said, in the words of the Zen sects, it's the cause and effect. In our words, it's the Tao heart returning to peace. How could the Tao heart be truly peaceful? The thoughtless. How could the thoughtless be the flawless? He was very familiar with the way Nan Wang stood by the window and the slightly trembling sleeves. A swordsman in the state of broken sea could have such an emotional fluctuation because she was very angry. She didn't criticize those state dukes when she argued with them, but she let such an absurd proposal pass. Jingjiu knew the reason. Many years ago, she couldn't speak the official language well, so she wasn't good at debating with others. She got better later, but she would stammer when she was anxious, so she had no choice but to keep quiet. If she didn't talk, she wouldn't be able to win an argument. This familiarity was the connection between him and this world, just like Zhao Liu and Lu Shisui. They were both his cause and effect. The mountain path passed through the fog, and it became brighter ahead. As a gust of gentle wind blew over, the fog was dispersed, and the scenery became visible. Under the bright spring sunshine, the green mountains were extremely enchanting. There were pavilions everywhere by the cliffs, in the woods, and in front of the waterfalls. There were so many pavilions on the mountain that it was hard to count them all at once. Some pavilions had heavy eaves and large pillars, looking magnificent. Some pavilions were very simple, built with twigs and thatch. All kinds of pavilions were scattered in Aoyama, like chess pieces scattered in. You also think it looks like a chessboard, right? I just learned that this mountain is called the Chessboard Mountain. A clear and moving voice rang out. Many cultivation practitioners had arrived on the chessboard mountain. Most of the young disciples who were going to participate in the chess tournament didn't talk to the practitioners of other sects with their masters and colleagues. Instead, they were scattered all over the mountain. They were either meditating with their eyes closed or playing with the chess pieces in their hands, preparing for the game. The young girl who came to watch the game was bored to the extreme. As she saw the two of them, she rushed over to them. Zhao Liu greeted the big sister of the Platonist sect, and then turned to Sensei and asked, "Didn't you say you didn't like playing chess?" Sensei said while pointing at Jing Jiao, "I like watching the game. Besides, isn't he going to participate in it?" She didn't participate in the Zither tournament, and today was the first time she had appeared at the plum meeting. As the daughter of the sect master of the Platonist sect and the most favored granddaughter of the great grandmaster, she naturally attracted a lot of attention. Now, these gazes all fell on Jing Jiao as she flew through the air and pointed at him. Some of them had seen Jing Jiao in the Zither tournament of the plum meeting, and some didn't see him clearly because they were too far away. But anyone could recognize him because of his face. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.